Hi, this is Marlene with Miami Ghost Chronicles, and I want to welcome you to another episode of Stories of the Supernatural. Wherever you find us, whether it's a video or podcast on your favorite platform, please like and subscribe to us so that you can get notification of when a new show is released. You can also find us on major social media platforms. If you go to MiamiGhostChronicles.com, you can find links to the videos or MP3 files, which you can download and enjoy without commercial interruptions. If you're into classic horror, ghost, and adventure stories, I narrate Nightshade Diary, and you can find links at nightshadediary.com. If scary stories are your bag, and listening to encounters with cryptids, ghosts, dogmen, and other weird creatures sends a shiver up your spine, then go to supernaturalstorytime.com for links to our weekly podcasts. Noteworthy news about the paranormal world, true crime, conspiracy stories, and anything that is just plain weird can be found at eerie.news or visit the Stranger Than Fiction Stories tab at miamighostchronicles.com. Please subscribe to my newsletter on Substack. Just go to mppellicer.com for a link. I want to thank you for being part of my audience, and I think you are all wonderful. Hi, how's everybody doing? Good, I hope. I'm doing good. Before anybody asks me, I've had emails about my pigeon saga, about, my new endeavor, that I had one pigeon that I think was sold to me as a female, and it almost killed one of the males that I had, and it's like the cliffhanger. I sent off a feather for DNA, like, let's see, because some people say, well, you can look at this and you can look at that, and if you put your finger here, you can find out if it's a male or a female. I said, wait. I sent off a feather for DNA analysis. He wrote me back, not sufficient data. I was like, are you kidding me? And by the way, I've done DNA on birds before. So now I had to send out 3 more feathers, to find out if I'm almost positive it's a male. Positively, absolutely. But I want to have that for sure thing before. So everybody now is in their separate, cages and things like that. But yeah, it's like one of those things like, well, yeah. There's some animals that you could look at them and right away you could tell male or female, like chickens, roosters. I even have some exotic birds, parakeets. Pigeons are not that easy. For some people, I've spoken to some people, they go, oh, well, you could look at this and the foot and then you put your finger, and like, okay, yeah, I'm not there yet. I'm far from being an expert. So yeah, that's where I'm at with that. So I'll keep you guys, because pretty soon I'll be doing the pairing up, and let's see, that's gonna be my first experience with growing them. As a matter of fact, as you can tell, as everybody asks me, this is like, I'm still working, because I started trying to get a template for their pedigrees, which go back to great grandparents, like from the Netherlands and South Africa, wherever they're from. And this is me working, and you can't tell because the light here is really bad, but, yeah. Which, by the way, the writing on this crap is really, really small. And I just said, I could use any of the templates, so I decided to do my own Excel template, like with, like the family tree. And it's like, oh boy. But yes, again, I'm going to repeat it. In pigeon world, when it comes to racing pigeons, pedigree is everything, as in there's certain strains, if you want to call them that, or certain lofts that are producers of really great pigeons. And again, I was surprised myself. There's millions of dollars that some of these races will produce internationally, by the way, not only in the United States, but I think the one in South Africa, they don't have it anymore, but Canada, other parts of Europe, where the cup will win the millions and thousands. And of course they have, prizes for the fall. I never understood why people are into it the way they are, and that's why the pedigree thing is such a it's a lot of people think of the pigeon like the pigeon in the park. Nope. But there you go. Anyway, let's get on to the good part. The good part is who the guest is today, and this is the first time she's been here on Stories of the Supernatural. Her name is Brandy Stark. And she started the Spirits of St. Petersburg in 1997. Okay, and this is when she started academic research into the role of the liminal. She took the research to conferences and eventually expanded into studying the lore and legends of Tampa Bay, She did talks in the local community and met other individuals curious about the supernatural. She officially founded the Spirits of St. Petersburg, which is a paranormal investigation team, in the year 2000, and it remains an active group today. In addition to investigations, she leads ghost tours for Shadows in the Sunshine and Paradise Tours. And she wrote the book Supernatural St. Petersburg and Paranormal Pinellas, revising it for its latest release in 2021. And she's also hosts the Paranormal Pets on PetLifeRadio.com. Help me welcome her. How are you doing today, Brandy?
I'm doing okay. How about you?
Good. Let me tell you something. You've been around for a long time, and I've been doing paranormal research for a long time myself. And it's, eventually, people just either, well, they fade out. The ones that are new, they kind of think everything's like a reality show kind of deal. Like,
yep.
So it's great to meet somebody that's, like I tell everybody, I have people was like, Marlene, don't say that anymore. When you had to pay to develop film, in other words, pre-digital.
Yes.
Pre-digital, like, oh, that's nothing. Let me just erase it.
My very first paranormal money. It was on film. It was on a film camera. So
yes.
I totally get it, because I'll talk to younger audiences sometimes, and I'm like, so back in the day, I had a 400 speed black and white film, camera, not the digital kind. And you had to wait to develop, your pictures. And I remember that I sent off this roll, and it came back, and I'm in the store, and I'm flipping through because they're ghost hunting pictures, and I'm flipping through really quickly. And there was one with an image, and I was jumping up and down in the store, and they just stare at me because they're like, what store? What do you mean? I'm like, yeah, okay, you cute little things.
Right. This is, people don't realize that it's not that instant gratification when you look at either your phone or whatever you're using. Like,
and they don't know about
there where, and it was like, oh my God, like, be careful when you open up, the film,
film
so it doesn't get it, all those things were like, and then of course, then you got charged more if you wanted developed overnight, you had to pay. It could, and considering what you were trying to capture, that sometimes all you got was a black square, because especially if the lighting was low.
Yes.
It was like, it was, I want to say, like, in the last 20 years or more, there's been a big change as far as people going into, I tell everybody back then, also there wasn't all those gadgets that they got now.
That's for sure.
And I tell everybody, you actually spent more time observing.
I agree.
Than observing other things, as far as, and I want to say, because it was just, and honestly, sometimes things happen when there was no way for you to get the proof. How's that?
That's right. That's part of the reason in the beginning, for example, and it still holds today. I always had, you had to have 3 people for an investigation, or 6, or above, because you always wanted to have at least 3 people in case something did happen. Usually you could have one person who saw it, the other person might not have seen it, but usually with a third, you had a tiebreaker. But that's because you really had to watch for it. And I do remember being very annoyed one day, because we were actually investigating a place over here called Tampa Theater, which is a big haunted hotspot. This is before all of the TV shows came out. And,
yes.
I was with my group, and we're in the theater. It's like 7 a.m. I think this was the second or third an investigation that we did. And by golly, I'm talking to one of the managers of the theater in another room, and the whole group is together in like a mezzanine balcony area type thing. And I'm sorry, she's been a.
Don't worry about it.
And
we already talked about that.
Anyway, while I was talking to the manager, I go back in to rejoin my team, and they're like, oh my gosh, you missed it. I'm like, I missed it? Oh yeah, there's like this whole cologne thing going on, and everybody could smell it, and it was crazy. And I'm like,
well, makes you think, like, were they waiting for me to walk away, like kind of
and it happened a couple of times. I'm like, really? Not just there, but there's been other investigations where you just want to go, okay. Or when you actually had to take a little more time to set up equipment. And the ghost would do something ahead of time.
Or after you break everything down, you're putting everything away.
Exactly.
You're like,
wow, what a boring night. And then all of a sudden it's like, yes, people don't realize that. It's almost like they have a sense of humor kind of deal.
Yeah,
Like,
you do. You really do. And I think the ghosts have a sense of humor because they're like, okay, I'll show you.
yes,
Just
yes.
go away.
You know why? Because I think people have gotten accustomed to these reality shows where everything's on cue. You know, the sighting, the sounds, the EVPs, and it's like that's not reality. Sometimes, a lot of times, it's not on your schedule.
No,
You know,
I know. And in fact, there's a place in Florida, Penelope, she was so good for a minute there.
don't worry
Sorry.
about that. Don't worry.
I have all pugs and one puggle, and this is the only one that has a snout. And oh my gosh, the difference in sound is incredible. But anyway, we went to the May Stringer house, which everybody goes to in Florida. It's the most haunted spot.
Is this the one that's? Am I thinking by Brooksville?
Yeah, it's in Brooksville.
Okay.
And that case was actually really interesting because I had been there 4 times. It's the only place where I've actually had somebody scratch or slap me. I'm not quite sure what it was.
Really?
It was like 2008, yeah. And there's a misogynistic ghost in the attic. I'm like, well, okay. And my female investigators were starting to feel really very uncomfortable. And one felt like something had scratched her on the back, and there were no marks or anything. And I remember saying, look, whoever's up here, you need to back off, my investigators. And nothing happened at first, but, we're packing up. A couple folks are like, I'm totally not comfortable here. I'm going to go into another room. I'm like, yep, go for it. We were up there for a little while. Nothing happened. And then I was getting ready to leave the area, and I realized that my cheek was burning. And I'm like, what in the heck? And it really felt like, somebody had like done a single scratch down my cheek. And but there's nothing in the reflection. Nobody saw anything, but I mean, it burned. And I was like, okay, that's interesting. But we've gone back a couple of times since then. And it was the only time it ever happened because unfortunately, with the TV shows, we've seen kind of this paranormal tourism that's really happened. Yes. And we went to Maystringer late last year. You can actually rent the place for 8 hours for like, was it $200 or $400? I can't remember how much it was. But and the odd thing is that you can see how the ghosts get impacted. I have been there 4 times. They've almost always had something going on. The last time we did get some knocking, but what was really weird is that it's like my sensitives who were there were like, they don't want to talk to us. They keep going to another area.
It's like, yeah, man, we've had enough.
That's it. And it's nothing personal. They're just tired. They're tired.
Do you have a suspect as to who the misogynist is in the attic?
Yes, they have officially named him. They think he might have come with a trunk, like an antique that came in. I want to say they called him, started with an I. I want to say Ivan or something like that. I don't know. But I can't remember. It's the end of the teaching semester as well for the college semester. So my brain is just, I spent 4 hours grading papers today. I'm like, oh my God, no more. God. But anyway, it was a really.
So in other words, he's not a part of the house. He came with something that was brought there. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. So he did transfer in. There are a couple that seem to be with the house, but I was just really shocked to see. It's like we tried to live stream it, and we had 5 different things that we could live stream from, 3 to 4 different networks, including the one from the house. Right. And it wouldn't work. None of them.
It did one of those deals where everything just decided like, what are the odds on that, right?
It was very odd. And then, as I said, my sensitive was like, yeah, they're just tired. They're tired of the dog and pony show. And I'm like, wow. Yes. So we tried to kind of, end the live stream element. We really tried to come up with some different questions for them. We actually caught this one really strange little blip because the knocking sounds had begun on the floor below us because, yes, that's a lovely little ghost for you. And so I went down with another investigator to make sure that it's, there was nothing that we could explain. We're looking at the doors and all of these sort of things. And I was just kind of panning around the room with my cell phone camera, not even anything fancy. Right. And right by the communication room, and it is very fast, there is this little tiny blip. And I have gone over it. I've slowed it down. It is only there for something like maybe 3 or 4 frames. It is that fast.
Mm-hmm.
And I honestly think that what ended up happening was it wasn't expecting me to be panning around. And I think
Yes.
when I did, I kind of got caught quickly and then went, oh, I'm out. And that was okay. I don't mind that. But at the very end of the investigation, we ended up basically, giving up about 2 or 3 hours of the investigation. We just said, you know what, if you guys are tired, we're just going to let you have the house and have it, to yourself for at least a little while. And I don't know. I don't know if there are any results from that. I hope that the ghost got a little bit of rest, but I mean, you have to have a little empathy.
What? I have heard of that, believe it or not,
Okay.
where these places that get like too much of foot traffic of either investigators or things, like all of a sudden the paranormal phenomena kind of like goes away. Not that they've gone away, but stuff that was before was really active or obvious.
Yes.
And who a lot of times will even say, especially when it's the docents or anybody that works there, that, those are the ones that normally get to hear and see things because they're there before and after. And they'll say, no, things have been really quiet, or it's like not like before. And I still feel like they're around, and it's like everybody's like you said, they kind of like, man, all right.
Yeah, well, and I don't blame them. I mean, I kind of get it. Can you imagine having all these strangers come in? They have tours, they have haunted tours, they have every Saturday the place is rented out by teams. I would be tired too. I'd be like, you know what, I'm out. But the interesting element was, and this is what I thought was really kind of tying in with the whole TV thing, is that they were doing they were doing some paranormal TV show there, and I cannot remember what it was. This would have to be a new episode, and I don't really follow the shows, but and they said that I guess the group was there for a week, that really nothing was happening on camera, and they ended up having to like move some items out of certain rooms to even get any kind of response.
Yes.
And I thought, and I feel a little torn about it because I understand, because the state of Florida doesn't love its history. That's unfortunate. I don't know. Well, Miami has probably already had this come and go, but St. Pete is it's gentrifying, and it's been gentrifying. But they are tearing down some of my haunted structures. It's killing me right now.
I'm surprised that some
to build condos, and I'm like, we can't support what we have right now.
Exactly. Yes.
And so, I feel for them, because I know that the ghosts are a moneymaker in the sense that it does bring in an income. And you have to have that. I mean, they were doing some hardcore reconstruction on the foundation. So I'm like, yeah, that's important stuff. You could actually kind of see this fissure going up where, the building had begun to settle and was beginning to crack. So I completely get that. But at the same time, what do you do for the ghosts? I mean, it's not really fair from their point of view.
Well, and this is the thing, like there was an old, down when I was in Homestead, there was this old, it started out like as a general store. You know how these small towns that, at the crossroads is where they got the post office and the general store, which is basically the meeting place for everybody.
Yeah.
And this place was out there, I want to say maybe like turn of the century. Because back then, Homestead, of course, was strictly agricultural. So this was the meeting place. And you have very old pictures of people in the buggies or very early autos. And in later years, I want to say 80s and 90s, they tried a couple of times to revamp, make restaurants, like something. It's one of those 2-story frame houses.
Okay.
92, when Andrew came there, it got almost demolished. Bottom line, though, now the last time I saw it, it had a fence around it. But I had spoken to a couple of people, and they said, you know what, we would, but since it's a historic location, they impose so many demands on the restoration that it's like it becomes too costly. Yeah, I mean, they're interested in purchasing it and keeping it, but they have a lot of times they make it super difficult and expensive for people to buy the properties.
Fit in with the time period. It doesn't have to be original material, but the construction is.
But they are like really, they're really, really like, same thing. There was a school down there, had been around there since, again, like the 20s and 30s. It was like the country school where everybody, all the grades. 92, when Andrew came through, which I was down there, It was really like a smaller school, one story and for years they finally renovated. I was hoping, and they said they kept it because it was historical, but it's not even used again because they had to put it back in the way it was. And I get it, but people don't realize that a lot of times, I think that's why some of these historical places, they sit on the
Have
market
to. Yeah.
and nobody puts in the money to do what needs to be done because they make them jump through a lot of hoops. Don't get me wrong, I understand, but as a matter of fact, most of the people that buy it want it to look the way it is, or the way it was, in other words, because they understand that's an attraction. Let's say whatever it
Right.
is that they're trying to do with it. But yeah, I unfortunately I've seen that in older parts of Miami, where a lot of, and sometimes people don't realize, hey, you know that before there used to be a hotel there or whatever, and they tore that thing down, and of course to build either an office building or, like you said, condos or stuff like that. It's like, oh wow, okay.
Yeah, it is. It is rough, and I don't know. The
And
state doesn't.
everybody asks what happens to the ghosts.
Oh yeah, yeah. Do they transfer buildings? Do they just dissipate because the building was their battery? I mean, it's it is an interesting question, and I always feel so badly for them. I mean, yes, change
It's
will
like, what do they
happen,
do? Are
but
they, well, there was, as a matter of fact, one time I was reading an article. I was doing partially an article, and this was out in California. And this was like I want to say one of them was even Oakland, and the other one where they had the old city hall. This is where they had the police and the prisons. And these places, believe it or not, had ghosts. Some people think that they were attached maybe to some of the people that were imprisoned there for a bit. It was the police station, everything was there. And they were moving everything to a new location. This was way back. And people were worried, like exactly like what we just said. What happened to these ghosts that were supposedly being seen there? Okay. And it's really funny because the police that were there during overnight, that they were the ones that would usually hear the ghost
see them? Yeah,
or see this certain image
yeah.
around, because of course when you get hustle and bustle, people, they miss that whole part. And same question, like what happened? Do they go? Do they disappear? Or
Do they transfer? Or, yeah, and that's always kind of the
yes,
interesting thing. So I don't know. I know there's another historic hotel that goes back to the 1920s that we actually investigated for a year, and it was, we did a way back in the day when we were trying to and don't take this the wrong way. It's just I sometimes think that some of us are meant to play in our own sandboxes. So, but at one point we were trying to kind of work with other teams, and you know how it is in the paranormal field.
Oh yes.
I'm a professor of humanities and religious studies, and so
Okay.
I almost say that the paranormal kind of runs in some ways like a religion, where you have all of these divisions and different
Oh
personalities,
boy.
and
I know
nobody
that.
gets along. So,
Yes.
but we
Yes.
did a
Yes.
conference there, and that was actually fairly interesting. But it changed hands probably 4 or 5 times in the past 10 years, and now it's slated to be torn down. And I'm thinking, okay, uh, you know, it just kind of breaks my heart because
Yes.
the entities that are there were actually the original founding families. And I'm like, oh
Really? Oh,
no, yeah,
they were the ones that built the house and everything. Yeah,
yeah,
because see,
yeah.
that's the thing. Like, some of these older structures, which usually in Florida, are, the towns start off on the coast,
Hmm.
and then they kind of go westward, unless some of the agricultural stuff. But yeah, some of these bigger houses or structures were built by the founding families, and then
So
they get swallowed up by the city sometimes, or things
yeah,
like that.
yeah. And again, I question how much Florida appreciates its own history. I mean, we're a young state in
Yes.
comparison. Nobody, and I always love this because everybody's moving here now, and I'm like, you know what? You should have seen us. We got passed around between the Spanish, the French, the English. Nobody
Yes.
wanted us. They kind of
Yes.
finally got, segued into the United States. Andrew Jackson came down here as a territorial governor, hated it, never came back again. He was here for a
Well, people
year.
don't realize that
Yo, the
back,
Florida
people, from what
sucked.
I understand, the same thing, after the Civil War, it was like you could get land cheap, or almost like they were trying to get people to settle here. But of course, what's the problem was mosquitoes,
And the
fevers.
heat. Florida actually went bankrupt. So part of the reason why they were trying to sell off the land to private buyers was to fund the state. So
but they had to kind of like entice people. In other words,
Well, and of course, remember, Florida was very backwards really until, well, the 20s we get the boom, the 50s, and then thank God for air conditioning. And then there's kind of that decline, and then everybody starts moving back in the 90s.
Well, and then people don't realize that also, unfortunately, got Florida, on the East Coast, but a hurricane, sometimes they came in and they would do a number.
Oh yeah, we've got John's agriculture.
Yes,
and the whole Key West Railroad.
Flagler's like,
I
would going down to the Keys, and let me tell you something. When you look at these little narrow bridges, and once the railroad, I'd be like, there's no way I'd ever have gone on that. It was very narrow.
Yeah, it is. It's really, really wild. So, Florida's a really unique state in that respect, but at the same time, I don't know. There's just so much newness, I guess, coming to the state that I'm kind of curious to see what's going to happen. And of course, the other thing that I love is that folks moved down here under the pandemic, and now they're like, and I've seen so many, like social media posts. Oh, well, Florida was great, but it's too expensive, too hot, too many hurricanes. And now they're all leaving. And I'm like, well, we could have told you that. You're the reason our costs went up.
Well, it's like, you know what? It's like, I tell everybody, sometimes they'll hear me complain, like, it's so hot, but I can tolerate it, especially down south. It's subtropical climate. To me, it's like, it's sticky. It's like, okay, it's hot. I'll say, man, it's really hot. But, when you grow up with that, I remember when I was in grade school, here we go, there was no AC in my classrooms. They had big windows that they would open.
Oh, wow.
And they had the overhead fans.
Yeah.
Okay. And then little by little, then later on, to grade school was finally where they started putting in like the individual ACs. And what I'm saying is like, and even at home, I tell everybody, you know what? I remember at home, we finally got ACs individually in our rooms, and we would turn on the AC at night.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And in the meantime, we had big fans in the living room.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what? And I didn't feel deprived. How's that? It wasn't like, oh my God.
It's gotten hotter, admittedly, but this house that this is obviously my house, but it's a 1940s house, and it has an attic fan, and so it's really cool because I did get it restored. I haven't really used it lately, but it has the old attic fan, right? That was designed that you would open all of your doors and windows, and it would suck up the air and kind of push it through the house. So, I don't know. But
it's a different also architecture depending also what time period you're coming in. But
this is post World War II building boom,
Yes, and that they, the breezeways where they would line up the front and the back doors.
Yep.
So because they were expecting you were going to open your doors. So
like the shotgun houses, right?
Yes. So that you would get ventilation. Yep. And that's the kind of thing that you only find like in Florida because there wasn't, AC was like later on.
Yeah. So folks forget. Yeah. You would go to the theaters because theaters had AC, so, but it is what it is, I guess. It's just, it's been a lot of change. And there are days where I'm like, do I really want to stick it out? But other days where I'm like, you've invested, almost 30 years and 3 more years, paranormal investigating. In this area, and I know where all the bodies are buried, so to speak.
Right, exactly, like that. I tell people there's a lot of places now that historically people is like, oh, you didn't know about that? Well, let me tell you that that's the history behind that building.
And I've been for years, I've kind of mixed being a professor, being an artist, and being a paranormalist, and I've always had to kind of toe the line with the paranormal element because, of course, academically speaking, when I first started this, ghosts were crazy, right? So, I was able to talk about it academically because I said they were a form of cultural representation of fears or what happens if somebody dies unexpectedly and isn't properly, whatever, insert, category. And I got away with it. It was fine. I always had to explain the liminal state. But when I started teaching, I kind of had to really scale that back. But I always remained fairly public. And I still remember I was teaching a world religions class in a more conservative part of town. And I was on one of our local news stations, and I was talking about the ghosts, and the students, one of the students after class said, "I know what religion you are, because when you teach world religions, it's objective. So, I don't give anything out, but, and I'm like, what? And she said, you're an occultist." And I was like, no, I'm not doing any necromancy or summoning anything. I am just
digging up the dead,
or
anything like that.
So, I mean, it's been a really interesting thing, but as education in the state has changed, and I debate how much longer I'm going to teach, because I've been in the classroom, college classroom anyway, since 2000.
Wow.
Oh God, I'm getting so old and all this stuff, but I'm a little worried about Gen Alpha, and I don't know, because that's only 4 years away. I thought I was going to get out of education in 2018, and it kind of sucked me back in on a part-time level. I was full-time for quite a while, and it just got to be, it was killing my soul. I mean, I was just, I was becoming apathetic.
Hats off to you. Hats off to you.
Well, and it sucks because I love my subjects. I mean, oh my gosh, I've dedicated my whole life
yeah, but it's like, but you got to teach it to students. And it's like,
that's the problem. I got to deal with people, and if it's not the students, it's the administration. But so I ended up going back on a part-time level, and I've been kind of juggling right now with more of the arts and more of the paranormal. And my end goal, I would still love to do this. It is on my bucket list, but if the real estate bubble ever bursts and I can find a nice older property, I would love to buy it and have basically like a local paranormal museum, in which we can kind of talk about the history. I do ghost tours here, and I have started working with the local history museum, the St. Pete Museum of History. And, it's an amazing way to get people to at least know where they're at, right?
Let me ask you, because I'm thinking to myself, well, when you talk about religions, most religions do believe in an afterlife. I'm saying, and from what I understand, and a lot of them believe also in ghosts, as in,
the Western religions are kind of interesting. So when you start dealing with Judaism, they kind of say, don't mess with it, because essentially read Deuteronomy, and there's like 13 rules in there about, not consulting ghosts and necromancers and all that. And then you have the story of Samuel and Saul, which, yikes. You broke a bunch of rules and you're going to be dead tomorrow and your lineage is over. So that's kind of a big heads up. Christianity, Catholicism dealt with it with purgatory for the most part. It's Protestantism. It's believe it or not, it dates to really King James and the King James Bible. That guy, King James II.
Right, like after the schism and stuff like that.
But he was not a big proponent of ghosts, and part of what actually happens is political, because these Protestants were moving so far away from Catholicism that they were getting rid of some of this, plus you have to mix in the Enlightenment. It gets really complicated, but ghost, boom, out. And so it's really James II who starts saying that they're demonic. There's, either they're going to heaven or hell, because that's what Jesus said. There's Luke 16, the story of Dives. And so you kind of get that resurrection of this whole idea of, don't mess with them. And Islam will actually say they're jinn. They're evil jinn that are trying to trick you. But the Western religions are a little more repressive with it. The Eastern religions and animism, a little more relaxed with it. So the indigenous Hinduism, Buddhism, I mean, heck, they have entire realms, right?
Yes, and a lot of these also Asiatic, isn't there like a part of them that are into ancestor worship?
Absolutely.
In other words, it's not how's this? They're scared of the ghosts, like what they call, I think, hungry ghosts, or ghosts that don't have a family to take care of them or remember them.
Which is
that's not the good part. The good part is if you have family members, you want to keep your ancestors' spirits happy.
That's correct. And it's interesting because if you look at that, culturally speaking, you are paying homage to your ancestors. And your ancestors have a vested interest in you because you're carrying on the family name. And if you screw up, your ancestors, they're your defense attorneys on the supernatural level. So if you upset them and they withdraw their favor, then you can gain more misfortune. But it gets to be kind of an interesting element too, because it's also a warning about what happens if you don't have that family. family, right? And we go all the
Right.
way.
The family thing is like even beyond the grave, they're checking in on you kind of deal.
Well, not only that, but what happens if you don't marry and you don't have a family, or you don't have,
Right.
you're right, so you're the cultural aberration because we're all supposed to be
Yes.
married with kids. So I mean, it's really, really fascinating stuff. And Hinduism, I love Shiva because he's the god of education, because he's the god of renunciation and new thought, and he's also the god of ghosts. I'm like, yeah, we get teaching and ghosts in Hinduism. That's
Right.
awesome.
Yeah.
Perfect. And then, of course, you're right. With Buddhism, it's the hungry ghost realm. And so it's interesting, although all of those will also tie into mental insanity with ghosts. So they will kind of tie that in, like the hungry ghost level. If you obsess over something that they identified with, they can attach to you, and
Okay.
kind of in a primitive way, but anyway, of explanation, but they can exacerbate that little chink in your armor, and it makes it worse. And so it can lead you to that insanity. So it's a really mixed bag. But in the West, we have the whole concept of, a family circle and the guardian angels, right?
Yes.
Grandpa dies and he's in heaven watching over us.
Yes.
My mother continuously says, when I pass away, I'm going to be your guardian angel. And I'm like, oh my gosh.
No, don't do that.
Shoo, go on.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's that interesting element. So we kind of have it here in the Western ideology, but it's perhaps not as developed or not as accepted. It's just it's not canonical. I guess that's the way to say it.
Right.
But I mean, wow, we are just, humans are really interesting. They're fun.
Right.
They're terrifying.
And really, the question's always been, what happens to us after we die? They've done the near-death experiments, where you have all these medical personnel, even hardcore analytic types like doctors who absolutely think, once you're dead, no brain function. That's it. Have had situations where they've spoken to people that they're not, it's not like somebody was looking to have a near-death experience of what they witnessed, whether it's hearing things that were taking place that there's no way they could know of, because you'll have some that'll say, what, this is your brain, that tunnel experience is your brain, and all this other, so yeah, I think that's the question everybody always has, like what happens after you're dead? Okay, that there's a ghost, but I think the other part is, do you get stuck,
right? Or what creates them? Or is there a difference between a ghost and a spirit? And I spent a bit of time, because a ghost is stuck, whereas a spirit goes back and forth. And what is a crisis apparition? Because those sure do happen. Those actually go back to Virgil's Aeneid. They're way back in the Roman Empire. Oh, heck, further than that, they go back to the Epic of Gilgamesh. The crisis apparition is that one that gives you that missing piece of knowledge, right? Or that assurance. You see them once or twice, and then they're gone, right?
Right. Yes, that just a momentary thing, and it's almost like you want to say they're not stuck.
No, they're just trying to get that information to you, and then poof, they're gone. And that's probably, and what people don't realize is, like I said, I've done this a long time, and people tell me their ghost stories, and I always find it interesting, because I always tell folks, everybody has at least one thing that they can never fully explain. That one experience. And usually if folks are like, do you think that was supernatural? And I'm like, do you think it was supernatural? Because if you're still asking that question, the odds are pretty high that it was something that has set you on edge, right? It's that one thing. Now, if you're having these all the time, we might need to, seek some medical advice, but that one special thing, but it's family. It's family. And people are so funny, because back in the early days, they'd be afraid to tell me. They're like, you're going to think I'm crazy, but.
Yeah, isn't that funny? Before it became so mainstream, people would be like, okay,
but,
like off the record kind of deal, like, okay.
Yeah, exactly.
I got a story I want to tell you, and be like, okay, spill it.
That's it. And, but the number one story that I get, heck, the most direct encounter I ever had is with family. Yes. And, it's not forever. It's usually the first 6 months to a year. You get some stuff in that second year, and then it kind of peters off to just significant, every now and again.
Yes.
And sometimes it's not even significant. Sometimes you're just sitting there and all of a sudden you smell your mother's cologne, but it's just that little reminder that they're watching over you. But, I've always found that to be really, really interesting. And, I try to work very hard to dispel kind of the negative images of ghosts that have developed.
Let me ask you, now that you say that, have you ever been at a location or an investigation that you were like, this is really bad, this is dark, or something like malevolent? In other words, this is not like, I don't know, I might need to extract my team out of here because I don't feel comfortable.
For the most part, we try to really screen the cases.
Okay.
My goal is to keep my people safe, keep me safe,
Sure.
keep the homeowner safe, keep, everybody safe. But every now and again, yes, there was a couple who lived locally, and this is when the team was new. So this was prior to 2008, I want to say. And they were selling haunted dolls on eBay.
Holy
So
crap.
they were trying to create portals from items that they were buying from haunted locations. I am not making this up. I was like, oh my gosh. And they were literally trying to attach spirits to the dolls and sell them. And they asked us to do an investigation of their house. And that was one of the very few places very early on. And I always told my team, if you do not feel comfortable, you are more than welcome to leave the property, but let us know what's going on. And if more than one of us is uncomfortable, we'll all go because,
Right.
And that was one of the properties. I mean, people started feeling nauseated. Gosh, I wish I still had this. This was back in the day before we all had digital recorders. So this is on tape. I don't have it. But there was a growl that seemed to have shown up on one of the EVPs.
There you go.
I'm just like, nope. And so we ended up packing up and, saying, well, our recommendation is that you really stop doing this, because you are really...
Let me ask you, what were they? Were they having negative experiences themselves? I don't understand. It's like, or what is it you were trying to? People.
Yeah, it was weird. They wanted to find out if their house was haunted, and I will have to find out. Gosh, I will have to look back at the case. I really don't think they were admitting to any negative experiences. But while we were there, because they're all happy selling their dolls on eBay. But while we were there, we're like, there's a problem here. And we never heard from them again, which...
what was it? Well, you guys were doing this, but something got away from you, as in all of a sudden?
Yeah, that's it. And
okay.
It just was... there are just days where I sit here and I think, my God, really? Why would you do this? But okay.
Yes.
So,
I went on some investigations where really what they really wanted to do was identify in other words, like, you don't have a problem. All you're hoping is that we're going to do the research and name your whatever's here, if there's something there.
Yeah.
And that's okay. But it's like, sometimes I think that people, depending on their attitude, sometimes they cause their own problems, because sometimes some of these hauntings, depending on what it is, can take a bad turn.
They can. Yep.
Depending on what the dynamics in the family are. A lot of stuff where, like what you were talking about, that here they're trying to run a business and kind of like, who knows what they did. What type of invocation they might have done, thinking, hey, whatever. And then something, even that beginner's dumb luck. God.
It's crazy. But it's interesting because a lot of times the people that I've mostly encountered, they just want to know if there is something there and who it is. And I absolutely don't mind doing that. But sometimes folks are afraid, and I have to say, okay, well, let's back this up a little bit, because tell me what's been going on. And there's nothing really hostile there. It's just that there's this presence in the household and they're afraid. And so part of it is, kind of talking them through this idea that, you are the land of the living, this is your property. And, have you tried talking to them? And even if, my feeling is, even if it isn't an actual haunting, hearing yourself say something out loud, if it's just psychological, will sometimes, or, this works with religion too, by the way, but religion gives a sense of psychological control or understanding of the world. Why do bad things happen to good people? Test of God, karma, insert reason.
Yeah.
With the ghost element, why are these, in fact, we are just working through a contact with this. Why are bad things happening to me? Well, obviously I must be haunted, and they send all of this stuff in. And I have one tech person who analyzes it, and God bless her. I mean, this is a voluntary group. She spent a lot of time doing this, and there's nothing.
So let me ask something. What is it? This person, they're saying after a certain point in time, bad things have happened, like beyond.
Yes, but it's stuff that's things like, I was supposed to get a couch, and on the day I was supposed to get the couch, this person got like this horrible illness. Well, that's coincidence,
Right, they say, they're reading stuff into it that's like,
that's it.
Bad things happen. It's just like,
and that's sometimes I think, even with homeowners, sometimes, why are these creepy things happening? When you do the research and you can at least give them an identity, and you kind of give them, just speak out loud. Listen, I really don't want you bothering me while I'm sleeping. Don't go in this area, leave the pets alone. 95% of the time they're going to listen, and do not overreact, because if you overreact, you are giving them fuel. It's like whenever you do this with anybody else. So, treat them like a person. We were at one house where it was a mother and her teenage daughter, and then she had an infant son, it was a really interesting situation. And she would hear footsteps all night long, and they were just terrified, like the toys would turn on by themselves. And when we did the research, it turns out that there was a neighbor that had basically really bad dementia / Alzheimer's, who before he had passed away, he was taken to a home, but he had died, and she had bought the house after that. And, he was lost. I mean, he was still kind of wandering through the house, wondering who these people are and what all of this stuff is. And, we basically said, well, let's try this. Let's try to give him a task. If he still considers this his home, but he knows you're here, let's ask him if he will watch the front door and guard the door. If you can't get him out, give him a task, get him focused on something. And sure enough, the activity died down. They contacted us about 8 months later, and they said, well, we're hearing some footsteps again. And I said, okay, well, have you given him another task? And, reinforced the front door, said, thank you so much for watching this. We feel so much better. They did, and it stopped again. So sometimes it's just...
The solution is very simple. In other words, it's not like, hey, you need to have like an exorcism of, like none of that extreme. Let me ask you, have you ever come across... This is, of course, obviously residential, where there's stressors in the family, maybe dysfunction, and they're kind of throwing it at the haunting or the paranormal, and you're feeling like this is not a ghost problem, this is a you problem.
Or there is a ghost, but it's getting so exacerbated.
Right.
There was one investigation I have never forgotten, because it was like, oh my gosh, we are there, and the wife is an overbeliever. Oh boy. And the husband is a complete skeptic. And it was to the point where they're talking about, well, the fan moves on its own. They had a ceiling fan that would move or turn on its own. Well, it's right in front of the air vent, so we can watch that, and that'll happen. Sure. Another thing that happened was, I put food in my refrigerator, leftovers, and the next day I come back and they're gone. I'm like, well, you have teenagers, right? Yeah, but I asked them, and none of them say they ate the food, and they wouldn't lie to me. And I'm like,
all right.
But the problem was that there was this huge rift between the husband and wife, to the point that a couple members of my team were like, and this happened one other time that I can really think of. But anyway, my team was like, oh, we got to tread really carefully.
Sure, exactly. That's what I'm talking about. That even whether there's a ghost there or not, you go in there and you're like, okay, this, you guys got something going on here. You're like, maybe what you really need to do is maybe family counseling or something, but hello.
I mean,
Yeah.
there was enough to say we had some slight activity. So, but he's completely dismissing her. And then,
Mm-hmm.
she's taking that and blowing it up into this,
Yeah.
And there was another time, and I knew this case was going to be interesting because we got there and it was a husband and wife, and she was wearing a Michigan shirt and he was wearing Ohio State. And if you are not aware of the Michigan Ohio State thing, as soon as I saw this couple, I
You're
did
like,
not
oh
even have
crap.
to
No
go in
wonder
the
they don't get
house.
along.
I was like, okay, let's see what happens here. And it was very tense. It's very tense. I'm like,
And you
well,
know what? And it makes you wonder if, that they also produce some type of kinetic energy that amps up
oh,
whatever's going
absolutely.
on there.
We had one case years ago where it was a mother and teenage daughter, and whenever they had arguments, activity would start up.
There
And I'm
you
like,
go.
well, yeah, there, so sure.
Yeah.
So just, we've really kind of tried to work with folks, particularly over the years. I've had a lot of time to mature with this, and it is just about, trying to remind folks that they want a happy household, a safe household, a
Yes.
calm household. You want to be protected and safe. And
Yes. This is
so
your sanctuary.
that's it, and if there is something here, can we come up with a resolution? 90, like I said, 95%, maybe more than that, 99% of the time, everything kind of calms down after an investigation. And I kind of try to explain it's like when you're in grade school and the teacher says, does anyone know the answer? And you're like, me. And you've got all this energy and you finally get the answer out and you're like, oh, right. You kind of, and so just trying to get folks to work with that. Although right now, oh my gosh, we started a couple years ago. I won a grant and I did what did I call it? A pop-up paranormal museum in my art studio. And I had a grant from
Okay.
the Heat Arts Alliance. So we actually had some multiple things going on where I actually had some haunted or items from haunted places, but this was like outside and they were not haunted. I'm not doing that. The studio itself does have its own haunts, and thank God my it's actually a building that goes back to 1916, and the other artists are all really cool about it, about the ghosts. And we actually got called in 5 years before I got a studio there to investigate. So it was really cool when one opened up, and I mean, it was complete happenstance that I even ended up there. I can't even tell you. So I'm like, so I'm very protective over my building and the ghosts there. But we had art and all of this other stuff, and it was really kind of fun. We had a People's Choice Award for the best illustration of local ghost stories, and I really enjoyed it. But
isn't that great when you that type of presentation?
And but I met a fellow who also won a grant, and we were talking, and he was in a local neighborhood here called Roser Park, which is an old one going back to about 1911, and my neighborhood has a funeral home on the corner. And I'm like, all right. So I've been here since 1992, moving over from good old Lutz, Florida. But, my neighborhood has this, funeral home. His has a cemetery. And I'm like, oh, man.
Right, there you go.
And so we actually started doing some ghost tours there because I had investigated 3 of the buildings, prior to his contact.
Okay.
But, and this was really interesting because his house, we did kind of a deep dive into the research because of the area of activity. And it turns out that in the late 70s, there was a fight between neighbors, and one neighbor got hit so hard that he was found unconscious.
Okay.
And everybody thought he was drunk because he had been drinking, that he fell. But it turns out that it was actually a fight between neighbors, and that he was at the other neighbor's house, and he started talking smack about his family, and the guy, beat him up and literally threw him out of the house. And it's really wild when you actually find the articles that talk about not only this case, the house, there were all sorts of caveats there. But this neighborhood has been such a hotbed because we started a ghost tour there, and we are doing them basically twice a year. And every year in between, we kind of ask for volunteers if anybody thinks they have ghostly activity and they'd like an investigation. We talk a lot about the history of the neighborhood. We have somebody from the neighborhood association who talks about, some of the importance of the neighborhood. I mean, it's, we try to be really super educational. And the interesting thing is that this place, I think their streets are haunted, in all honesty.
Well, you know what? Some of these older places, sometimes they do like an arc, like they're residential and
Mhm,
nice and everything. And then like maybe, let's say like you're saying, stuff that was built like maybe in the first 19 to 1920. And
mhm.
then by the 1960s, 70s, 80s, they kind of fall into decay where they become
Yep,
seedy. And
yep, that
that's
was
when you
it.
get, when you start doing the research, you find out all these like crimes and murders, and they
Yep,
found a
that was.
body in the, and it's like, oh my God, yeah.
Oh, yeah, Florida was tough at that point.
Yes,
Oh my
yes,
gosh. And
yes.
in fact, when I moved here in 92, that neighborhood, um, I remember I wanted to, the cemetery was alleged to be haunted. And so I had a retired police officer on my team, and it took me years to talk her into like doing an investigation. And she's like, I will only do if it's Sunday morning around 10 or 11 in the
Oh
morning.
boy, she's
You
like,
know, it was like really very specific. And I was going through in my little naive, because some of the art that I do found object art. And I'm wandering through and I'm looking at the cemetery. And I'm like, oh, wow, look at all these spoons here. And they're like, okay, do you not know what the spoons are for? I'm like, well, they're
yeah,
found object. And they're like, no, 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 no. So I
yeah,
had to learn about
exactly.
it. But the wildest thing is that this neighborhood has been the most active we have ever been in,
I
almost
believe it.
consistently, from one house to another. We have the light up cat toys, by golly, the super expensive
Yeah.
type that which I
If
love.
this was the hangout spot, yeah, they might live somewhere else, but this is where they hung out, like in life, like that.
Yeah,
Because of, for
but
whatever reason, this is really
it's
their
like
place.
we have gotten some EVPs. We've had lights go out. The little paranormal cat balls is what I like to call them.
Yeah,
On the investigation. I'm like, these are our official light sensors, but anyway, I don't know.
yeah,
What do you do with them? We've had a theremin. We don't have a REM pod because those, from what I understand, there's some question about them. But a
yeah.
good old fashioned theremin. And by golly, man, all of this stuff is going off. It is insane. So that's actually been really, really interesting. It's
Let me
kind
ask
of.
you something. Was it at any point that area? You know what they call the tenderloin in some parts of town, which is where basically sometimes where the bars end up at, and we're like, if you're gonna do something, was it ever that kind of place?
It Yes, kind of. It was an area that, because of the cemetery, for
Yes.
example, there was a mausoleum there, and this man so loved his wife that for the first 2 years after she died, he actually sat at the mausoleum. It had like her favorite trinkets, it had electricity, it had wallpaper. It
Wow.
was crazy. And he would talk to people, and he would even open the casket from like, okay, welcome to
Okay.
Florida. So this was back in the 20s to 40s. They were
Okay.
married quite a while, so it was the 40s. Then he ends up getting remarried, and wife number two is like, we're not.
Yeah. No.
And I always love that because I'm like, first of all, ladies, if you ever think you're desperate, I don't know how
Yeah.
this guy got remarried. Oh my God, I think that's creepy. But and secondly, her family was like, yeah, they tore down the mausoleum, and they
Yes.
moved her body to Jacksonville. But the interesting thing
Are
is,
you kidding me?
oh
They
no,
moved her up.
yeah, they're like, nope.
Holy crap.
So they're like, they got her out of there. And the interesting thing is that this had become kind of a known thing. And so I know in the 70s, people would be at the bars and the bars would close down. If they
Okay.
wanted to continue the party, the story was they would go to the cemetery and they would toast, to this now gone mausoleum. But
That's
um,
funny. That's a
you know,
great
so
story.
it definitely, I mean, there's definitely that idea, and people do. I mean, I moved to Florida when I was 4, so
Okay, you're
I have
Floridian.
been here pretty much. And I'm sorry to say it was 1980, so I'm also very old. But
Oh
and
boy.
Florida was tough. It was a tough town. People who've grown up here, I mean, I know folks who are like, oh yeah, we almost got abducted back in the day. There were lots of serial killers that were in
Oh
this
yeah, have you
area.
noticed? Well, you know what? I myself, I didn't know this. Miami-Dade County became a dry county 6 years before the Volstead Act. So of
Oh,
course, 6 years. Of course, what happened when, they did the Volstead, which is prohibition, no liquor,
Yeah.
is it drives up organized crime. And because,
And it comes from the Keys, yeah.
right. And,
From
the rum running and off
islands.
the
Yep.
Bahamas, because it was legal there. So that's why they call those bootleggers and those rum runners. But I didn't know that, because what happened was, in those 6 years, it spiked up crime, and they had like sections of town that nobody ever. There was a place in Miami called Hardyville, which is like where the bars and the brothels and all of this was. What pushed it along was that it was a dry county long before the rest of the country became dry. And that's why I'm saying that sometimes there's local things that you find out about the area that you're at.
Yep.
As far as like,
Well,
what happens with organized crime? People get killed, secret burials, like.
And a lot of folks, that's why we get Al Capone down here.
You all know, Al Capone. He was, but like, obviously he was very famous, and everybody knew who Al Capone was. But there was a lot of what I call the unknowns, which are people that you don't know their name, but they never made the paper, and bad things happen to them. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, and I know in Tampa we had. There was illegal gambling with Bolita, so there was kind of like the Cuban, Irish, and Italian mobs. Of course, they're never.
It's called the Dixie Mafia.
Yep.
People don't realize that there is such a thing, that in Florida, and Bolita was one of the things, the illegal part of like the vice, what they call the vice stuff.
Yep.
And that was a common thing, and in Tampa, like you said.
God. Oh yeah. So
but what I'm saying, those things that in the background, how it's from the paranormal investigator's vantage point, there's stuff going around the periphery of when you look at the timeline of what was happening in this area.
Yep.
Which is why if you want to call it spiritual turbulence, or just something like you said, the streets are haunted kind of feeling.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so weird where you start doing these investigations. Like we were called out to a place in Ybor, and it turns out that there was a serial killer from the 80s who was killing women.
What's his name?
Oh my gosh, I'm going to have to look at the case.
I was going to say, because God, like you were saying, Florida, I was like, everybody, even killers from across the country, everybody needed to do a pit stop in Florida and kill some people, and then kept going.
They all come here because it's fun. Anyway. But he stashed a body on the property at one point, and
really,
so it's kind of weird when you do some of this research and you realize just how violent a state this is always.
Well, yeah. That's what I'm saying. And unless there was somebody around, like a family member, say, "Hey, where's so and so?" I haven't seen so and so for a while.
That's right. Yeah. That's how we get. Didn't we have the trucker? The woman, I think, was down here in Florida. We had. Oh my gosh, we've had so many serial killers who come down here, and I think you're right. I think it's because the state is just so.
Everybody, even like I said, even if they start, even if they end up, if they started or they end up somewhere else, they come like dip in here. And then I'll hang out in Florida for a while.
And that's it. And it's so scary. And then you end up, you're doing this research and it turns out X was here. And you're like, oh, okay.
Well,
great.
You know what? Like one time when you were saying earlier about Flagler down in Homestead, this is like south end of Miami-Dade County. Turns out here they're building the railroad track. And, people would come up from other parts of the country looking for work to work on these projects, right? Well, some of these people, they were getting hurt or killed or dying. Accidents. This was not back like. So what they were doing is back then they didn't have any big cemeteries. There was like a main cemetery in Miami proper, and this was like Homestead. I want to say is like 30 miles south. Okay. So what they did was they were kind of doing like an unofficial graveyard. Like, hey, the worker. A lot of these people, they couldn't find families. A lot of them were from other states. Nobody they were going to ship. Nobody claimed the dead. In other words, so they were burying the dead out there. Well, this doctor owned this piece of land, right? And about 3 years later, they say, hey, you want to like sell that piece of land? And he's like, okay. And he forgets to talk or say anything that this place has been like an unofficial graveyard for these people killed on this Flagler railroad track project.
Lovely.
Fast forward it ends up becoming like one of the first public schools in Homestead. It dates back to like the 1920s, you know, and of course there's been paranormal occurrences there, and nobody ever thought, none of this, like in the Poltergeist, let's move the graves, because there really weren't graves. They were just basically digging holes. These were very poor, maybe putting people in sheets and chuck them in.
Well, we're all having that problem because they keep finding lost graveyards up here.
Really?
Oh my gosh! So they're usually African American graveyards.
Yes. Yes.
There is a place in Safety Harbor, and this is a chapter in the book where you have houses built all around, and then you have this one property that's it's because it's an African American cemetery. They did not build on it.
Okay.
But and it was an unknown cemetery, but they I love this. They just found one up in Clearwater. There was a cemetery where the Trop is. They do have some bodies there. The Trop has not really talked to us about that. I've tried, but there was a school built over one part of MacDill.
There you go. See, yeah, people forget. Like nobody. It's like dead people.
Tenement lots built over, yes. And so they're it's like, oh my gosh, okay. And so what do you do?
And then when they do some excavation for whatever reason, all of a sudden it's like, you're coming across all these bones, and see, that's the thing, people don't realize that, especially if it was a poor population. If they put across, it was wood, and that would decay after a year went by.
Or coppers, depending if you have enough money, but that would go away because we have acidic soil. And because we do have acidic soil, a lot of stuff dissolves out. So yeah. And in fact, one of our cemeteries up in Tarpon Springs is Rose Cemetery, and it's quite haunted. I mean, that place, holy cow. But it's the same issue. So it was an African-American cemetery, and so relatively poor population. And so there's all of these graves that are actually not marked. They've had to go through with a ground penetrating radar and start. All they do is they put down these little spikes with like it looks like a nickel, but it's not a nickel, but that size, so that you at least know where they are. And it's like there are graves outside the walls of the cemetery because they didn't even know about them, and it's just like so
that when they started the burials, it really was like almost like, for lack of a better word, like an unplanned cemetery.
Yes,
because at one point it was like, that piece of land way out there, go and use that, and then the town kind of builds out.
Yes,
and before you know it, there you are, and nobody. And then for some reason, the land becomes valuable. For some reason, it's like, for the cemetery? No, what cemetery? What are you talking about? They just...
You build right on top. So here we are.
They build right on top, yeah. Oh, like the Poltergeist, the theme from Poltergeist. They forgot to take the...
I guess it's much cheaper not to excavate, but
sure.
Yeah. And it's funny because one of the locations is in Clearwater, which is near St. Pete, but they are suing the city of St. Pete because the city, the city of Clearwater, because the city basically sold the land. They had built the building, and this private company bought it, and they were told everything was fine. And then years later, here they are with this. Initially, they only released that there was one grave. And I actually had an art exhibit there, and I as a good paranormalist would, I snuck some of my equipment in the car. I did not bring it into the art show, but in the parking lot, which was supposed to be haunted, I started asking my questions. Is there anybody here? And the meter goes off, and I'm like, okay. And because I had to keep it very small. I couldn't do EVPs or anything else because of all the background noise, but I could at least record on the phone. I had my, put on an airplane mode and walk away, but you can still, it's like this horrible camera work, but you can still see the meter. And, I said, do you just want people to know you're here? It was basically the question. And the answer was yes. And I'm thinking, this is really odd, though, to have this so active in this area. I'm like, I bet there's got to be more than one grave. Because, like I said, they were only saying there was one, maybe three. There was an entire cemetery still there.
Sure. Yes. Yeah.
I'm like, yep, there we go. Yeah. So there's actually like this lawsuit because everything was supposed to be, all up and done. And so now the question is there psychological damage to the property because of, this publicity that's come out?
Yeah, it's stigmatized at this point.
Yeah, that's it. And so And the funny thing is, I had a friend who worked there. I'm like, so is there any activity? And she wouldn't answer, but
That's usually a giveaway. It's like,
yeah, well, and she was very Christian at the time. I'm like, well, okay.
right,
But they wouldn't talk about it. I mean, it's like the company
right.
didn't talk about it, and they have been mum other than suing the city.
Well, there was one. I don't know if you heard of this came out in the 80s, and I don't know if you heard about the Black Hope haunting. And this came
Mhm.
out. The family wrote a book, and like a real thing, quick thing was it was out in Texas. I can't remember what part of Texas, and there was a developer who basically you bought a piece of land and they would build your house for you. Family
Okay.
buys a house, like 8 houses in that like little, I guess, little subdivision. Down the road, they all started having hauntings, especially after one of them was building a pool. What does he dig up? Coffins, right? Then they start finding out that what had happened was many years before, like I want to say turn of the century kind of deal,
Mhm.
a black community had existed out there and they had their cemetery,
Oh
right?
no. Yeah.
Now, what happened was, I guess the town was really small. They caught fire, the buildings, and the
Hmm.
community moved away. Because then later on, as a matter of fact, all the families in that little subdivision all started experiencing some type of phenomena. So they turned around and they tried to sue the company that had, basically
Land.
sold and built. And what happened was the the use of the cemetery, it was never registered in county records.
Hmm.
You see what I'm saying? In other
Hmm.
words, they didn't do it knowingly,
Hmm.
because when they looked at records, there was no records, and the community that was there after the fire, they just kind of like left the area. But of course, they had left these people buried there, and in some cases, there was no type of like granite memorial or so
Hmm.
stuff that you see in some of these like obelisks or cement
Hmm.
stuff. Nobody knew, and I mean, some really really unusual things started happening. To eventually, all 8 families left.
Okay.
And some of the stuff was on the darker side, but what triggered it was when that one person started to dig for a pool, and it kind of
Wow.
like, but when you were saying about suing, it was one of those things that unfortunately the family was nowhere to go, because the people that did the building didn't know
Mhm.
about it either. So,
Oh,
and
that's
sometimes it's
interesting.
like there's no, in other words, it wasn't like, yeah, we know there was a cemetery there and we're just not going to tell you about it. And it's really funny because the other day I was looking at how the different states handle when a house or structure is considered haunted. What are their obligations, like say in a real estate deal,
Hmm.
to disclose about it? And for them, stigmatizes either it's got a reputation for being haunted, or a murder or a suicide has happened. And it's
Okay.
usually like maybe 2 3 years, maybe depends on the state.
Hmm.
And in some states, unless the buyer specifically asks, they're not obligated to tell them. It's kind of weird. It's kind of like, oh well, you didn't
Hmm.
ask, so hey, sorry. Yeah,
And
it's
I
it's
want to
it's
say
really weird.
Florida, it has to be on the public record, and the real estate
Right.
agent is supposed to tell you. Um, but I can't. I don't know if there's a caveat about asking or not. I think
Right. No,
the
I
real
know that
estate agent
different
does.
states
Yeah.
have their own weird
But you're
little
right. You're
laws.
right. Yeah. Can you imagine? And of
You
course, I
find out
do.
after the fact, like, what? You mean what happened? Oh, there was a family annihilator, took care of his house. What? Yeah. Oh, I never thought to ask about that. Imagine that.
Well, that
Yeah.
was a case in New Jersey years ago. I was taking an ethics class, and that was kind of fun. And so I ended up writing a paper on the ethics of renting out a haunted house and not telling the people it was haunted. So it was
Okay.
in New Jersey, and this family rented this property, this apartment, and they had all sorts of activity and were very traumatized. They brought in a team who said it was haunted. I'm like, oh, that's where you always have to be careful as a team.
Yes.
And the tenants were trying to break their lease by claiming it was haunted and that they were not
Yes.
told. And so that was going. And I need to follow up on that case. I never did see how it resolved, but it is an interesting,
Let me
So
ask you, what you found out? Was it really haunted, or had a reputation being haunted before they rented it?
the owner was claiming it didn't.
Okay.
Right. So that was the argument back, and of course the question about breaking the lease. So they wanted to
Uh-huh.
break the lease and not have any recriminations from it,
Right, and
and
get their deposit back and all that other stuff, sure.
that's a problem. So, and I thought, well, okay, that's interesting. Do you use the ghost to try and get out of that if it's haunted to begin with? And what do we know about the team? And
I
did
wouldn't want to be
they?
that team. I'm sorry. I know that, but I
No.
would not want to be the people that go in there and be like, nah, thanks, sorry. Yeah, no.
Well, that's the other question that I've had to learn to ask in recent years, because we
Hmm.
always require a homeowner to be on the property.
Yes,
But are you renting or do you own? And do we have permission to be there?
sure,
And if they don't own it, then usually we have to, I would say, vague book it, but
yeah,
we can post on the investigation, but there's like no revealing details, and it's certainly very
sure,
scant. Uh,
yes.
Partly because of that. I actually had that
Oh,
happen. Oh my gosh,
let's hear that.
years ago. Um, how much time do we have left
No, we
before?
got plenty of time. Keep going.
Okay. Um, but because I was going to say I've got to check on my mom. but
Sure, whatever. Take whatever
uh,
time you need, and I understand about that.
what gets to be interesting, and I'll finish with this, and then I'll check in
Mm-hmm.
and see. She's probably gone to bed, and she's probably mad at me, but that's okay.
Okay.
But this did happen to us. We had investigated a house on Temple Terrace, and man, this place was really cool. It was the first time I encountered what I would call a shadow animal. And it was weird because it was like the size of a raccoon, but it was cat-like at the same time. It was black with black spots, and I swear I saw it come running directly at me. And I had an old-fashioned handy cam, the little infrared one, and
Uh-huh.
I actually put the camera down and was stepping out of the way. It did not show up on camera, I'm sad to say, but there was all of this activity, and it was really a neat house. And so we wrote our report about it, and I guess somehow the property was identified, or we sent the link to the wife. And it
Okay.
turns out that the wife didn't tell us that the house is in the name of her husband.
Oh.
They were getting it was like years later, they were getting a divorce.
Uh-huh.
And every time that somebody was interested in the property, she would send them the link.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
So I'm talking to the husband, and because they called and they're like, "What is going on here? Why?" And I explained everything, and I said, we have a signed statement because they at one point they were, apparently, she had some stake in the house,
Right.
but she was just trying to like stick it to him.
Yeah.
So she
Uh-huh.
was technically a homeowner, but it was in both their names. So even though we had her sign off and say we could be there, he had no idea. So
Yeah.
I was horrified, and I said, I am
Yeah,
so,
no,
so
that problem came in
sorry.
when she's mailing off that link. That's really what that did
So
it.
what we ended up doing was basically, I said, well, do you want us to take it down? And he said, well, no, that's not fair to you, but you have to scrub it of any information
Right.
whatsoever. And so that's what we ended up doing. But woof. And in fact, I think I was a wreck. I was very nervous
Let me
about
tell you
that.
something. This is a cautionary tale to any wannabe or present paranormal investigators.
Yeah.
This happens. You have to sometimes vet your cases really carefully before you get
Yeah.
in there because of this is the reality of ghost busting in the 21st century.
It's
It
a
is what it is.
learning process. So
Yes, where sometimes, believe it or not, for lack of a better word, you're being used. The
that's it.
paranormal investigation.
I think initially she was genuinely interested,
Oh yeah,
but
but
it got
still.
twisted. And it
Right.
was
And
like,
here
wow,
you're just doing
doing my
your
thing, living
and
over it.
all of a sudden you're like, whoa. I'm in the middle of this divorce proceedings and it's like, nah, that's not what I signed up for. This is just to figure out that's really interesting that you
Yeah.
saw that creature, that black, whatever that was, raccoon.
I have a shadow animals link on
Let me ask you, do
my
you think
page.
then that there was something in that house then? That's unusual.
Yeah, I think so. She was probably exacerbating it a bit because she was trying to do EVP recordings. And I always
Oh
tell
my
people,
God,
please,
there you
please don't
go.
investigate your own house. I mean, my house
Yeah.
may have a former homeowner in it. She may have faded over the years, but I am not investigating my house because,
Sure. People
you
don't
just,
realize that's like,
you need to
yeah,
get
like,
somebody objective in here. And I have had my house checked by my team, but whatever's here is very mild, and it's definitely, I'm not having much with it at all
hmm
anymore. When I first moved in, I would actually hear voices coming from this room, like right in front of this window that I'm at. And it
okay.
sounded like a conversation, and I would get up and I'm like, what the heck is going on? And it was always at 7 in the morning.
Interesting.
And it was only usually February, March, and April. I never heard it outside that time. And this is still the original window. I did not replace it. So it's the original glass, but over the years that stopped, and I don't hear
Okay.
much of anything, but that was weird. But again, you don't investigate your own home. So I think the house was haunted, but I think she might have been exacerbating and maybe poking at it a bit. Um, but if we do have a moment, if you
Yes,
don't
yes,
mind,
yes.
let me, if you don't mind, my calling next door and making sure mom's okay.
Absolutely.
She is 80. I am her only child. I have no siblings, no kids. She is the last survivor, mostly of her family, and so we're it. And
Believe me.
she is 80, and she can be. I'm very lucky that she can stay at her house, and like I said, we have a joint backyard. But
That's usually that's nice, believe it or
yeah,
not, because I'm sure that outside of those circumstances, yeah, yes.
but I do need to check on her because she goes to bed at
Absolutely.
11.
Go ahead. Go ahead. Do
Okay.
your thing.
All right. I will be back in a second here. Let me.
No problemo. Don't worry.
All right. Oh, oh dear. And I got to clean up Pug stuff.
In the meantime, back at the ranch. Okay. Isn't this interesting? I'm going to talk about this usually what I do at the end of the shows. Yes, I love talking to somebody, like I always say, that's been doing this for years because when you do, well, besides the tours, obviously, that she does, but that you work in this field, whether, when I say work, I mean, not that you're getting paid or anything, but you start having all these different experiences that's when you realize this is not like what you see on the TV shows. Okay. Case in point, that right there that she described, where like I said, sometimes you would get investigations, especially later on, where people like were hoping it was haunted and they were trying to figure out, hey, can you find out if it is and who it is? And yeah, if it is, great, just leave it there. And then you get into situations like what she just described, where, and of course, she's never dreaming, you know, what's going on in these people's lives as far as their private lives, that there's a looming divorce, and maybe a squabble over a property. And the next thing you know, this lady is like, hey, guess what? I'm going to use the the ghost hunters who came here, or the paranormal group, to like screw with you. And believe it, getting back to also what we were talking about, the stigmatized properties. Some people say, oh, that's cool. And as a matter of fact, as I wrote an article on it, you can find it on my Substack, where some of these stigmatized properties, yeah, some people are turned off, whether it's haunted or there was a history of some type of violence there, murder, suicide, anything like that. Some people is like, thanks, but no thanks. I'll pass on this. And then there's other people that are attracted, like, oh, it's haunted. That's great. But it's always the roll of a dice. As a matter of fact, there's certain real estate agents across the country that is what they specialize in. They specialize in selling what they call stigmatized properties. Whether it's like there was a murder, suicide, even, and when I say haunting, that it has like a really conclusive history of being haunted. Okay, because they realize you gotta work it a certain way in order to, number one, sell it. Number two, make some type of money on it. I mean, there's a lot of facts, but yeah, that there's certain people that this is what they work in, as far as, and it's, some people know, some people even, and it's really funny because even the hardcore skeptics, the ones that don't believe in ghosts, don't believe in that, don't believe in this, You tell them, well, you know what? There was somebody died in the house, passed away, and they didn't find him for a week, something like that. And they're like, no, I don't want the house. It's like, okay, so if you don't believe in the afterlife or ghosts or anything, what do you care if somebody died in the house? You hear people like either they're elderly and they die, and sometimes it takes a few days or maybe even a couple of weeks till they're found, or suicide. And it's like, what happened to the I don't believe in that kind of deal? And then all of a sudden, the non-believers become kind of believers. As a matter of fact, if you go to my website, you're going to see they have a link to a company called Died in House. And what they do is you plug in your address, and it will give you a history if there's anybody that's either died in the house, or if there's been any kind of like crime, like as in, you have some of these suicides or murders or anything like that. It'll come up because there's people that actually check on those things. And then there's even people that say, hey, if you want to get a bargain on a real estate and you don't care, stigmatized properties might be your thing, where you could get a better price on a house in a certain neighborhood because supposedly something bad happened there. And guess what? You can maybe knock off $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 off the price because the owners realize, unless I make it a bargain, nobody's going to buy this place. And of course, it all depends how far back. There was one that I want to say was Maryland. Maryland, or I think it was Maryland. One of the states over there, this gentleman, he ended up buying a property where an intruder had broken in and killed a father and his young daughter. Nobody told him. He ended up buying the house, unbeknownst. Later on, it turned out he got killed he was murdered in this scenario. This one of these dating app kind of deals where people are set up and basically they're murdered. There's like it's a gang and whatever. And but later on, as a matter of fact, he did find out. As a matter of fact, he did find out after he had already moved in. And it was one of those things where the laws that were in place at that time didn't help him out. And it was like, I'm there. And, he made the best of it, but it's like, kind of like, and people ask, is it some type of curse? Because everybody sometimes thinks of like the haunting aspect. Like we've had a death in the family in there, or a death in the, is it going to be haunted? But some other people look at it as in the stigma is some type of curse with a property where, and I'm sure everybody's heard of it, like where certain properties, there was another one, that article is also in Substack, where there was, I want to say it's Seattle. Yes, Seattle. And the family that owned it eventually, like I said, it was a very nice house, like during the 20s, 30s, 40s, come the 60s or 70s, it was a big house, and they divvied it up and they rented out to an apartments, and it became like really seedy, and there was drug use and murders and everything, and then became better. One of those things like what she was talking about, where the area was gentrified and it became a house again, as in not a rooming apartment place. And it became known that for some reason, all the families that would move in there, the marriages would fail. It didn't matter. New marriages, long-standing marriages, everything would go belly up. And you would think, well, what are the odds on that? But sometimes certain properties get this reputation, for lack of a better word, for certain unpleasant things happening to you. But yes, that's another thing. If you've got a property, hello, and you're thinking you might want to sell it, and you really don't want it to be known as a haunted property, think twice about getting a team there. And because this is the thing, you could get a paranormal team to go in there and do an investigation for you and maybe find something there, whatever it might be, maybe not, but chances are they're going to post something about the investigation or what they found on their website. And fast forward maybe a couple of years or a year, who knows? Maybe for the very reason that it's haunted, you decide, I want out of here. I'm not going to try to figure this out as far as, I don't know, smudge it. I'm scared. I don't want to live here anymore. Or for other reasons, whatever. All of a sudden, that investigation and that poor paranormal team gets dragged into like, okay, this is a stigmatized property because it's haunted. Well, I didn't know. Well, you got a paranormal team in here, didn't you? Yeah, but in other words, you could run into a problem real estate wise because nowadays all real estate companies that are going to take a contract for the sale ask you about things like this. Like, are there things like besides termites and things about the house that you need to disclose? That's one of the things they ask about. And you could say I don't know, but the problem runs into that you say no or I don't know, and later on it turns out you did know. And how would you know? Well, because it was a paranormal team that came in here. So yeah, word to the wise, if you're thinking about selling your property and you really think it's legitimately haunted, something to consider, because nowadays everything gets posted on the internet in some way, shape, or form. But that's still, and once upon a time, you would hear like certain properties would get a reputation for being haunted, and even in small towns or communities, they would have the haunted house, which of course become abandoned because nobody wanted to live there. Nobody wanted to be the guinea pigs and find out if it was really haunted. Sometimes maybe it wasn't, but it usually, as a matter of fact, the nexus of the haunting usually would start with unexpected. Here, let me bring her back on. She's back here. Okay.
All right. Sorry about that. Child care, parent care, it's all lots of
I've been there, done that. My mom passed away in 2019, and yes, I get it. Believe me, I very much understand where you're going with that.
Oh my gosh. But bless her little heart. She was in a good mood tonight. I was waiting for her to be all snappy, and she wasn't. She was in a good, I was like, all right. I even got flowers, some gardenias. I thought, okay. So
that's good. That's good. Let me tell you. I was talking about that. I was commenting to the audience while you were away that it was like, hey, you know what? For word to the wise, if you're thinking of, where what they consider stigmatized properties is, if you're ever planning to sell your property and you don't want it to be known, don't call in a paranormal team, because they could turn around and say, you knew it was haunted. How did you know? Because you called in a paranormal team. So if you really decide if you want, because I say nowadays everything becomes posted. Once upon a time, like 20 years ago, that nothing would come of it. Nobody knew, but nowadays everything gets posted on the internet in some way, shape, or form. And it can bite you in the butt.
And I would also warn teams, when I'm trying to think, we did form an LLC in 2004, and I can't remember if this happened before or after we did that, because I'm getting old and I can't remember things anymore. But the reason we did an LLC is not because we charge, because we don't. Right. I mean, obviously investigations are free, but the LLC was to give us some legal protection.
Sure. Exactly,
because things like this happen, and it's it does cost us $140 plus or minus per year, but it's worth it, to have that little extra level of protection.
Sure, because even though clients, because when I remember we would have a waiver that they would sign still.
Yep, and the waivers don't always hold up.
Of course not.
So, because we do the same thing with the waiver, and nowadays I'm getting homeowners to say, yes, you have permission to be here on one of the videos, which we are.
Right, yeah, and it's all of a sudden things that before you didn't have to do, you have to, you unfortunately have to go down that road.
Because people have gotten, I don't know if we've gotten stranger or not, but there's definitely a cultural shift. I mean, the artist in me feels that coming, and it's been here for a while, but we're suspicious and we're angry. So you really have to cover yourself.
I was going to say that litigious, you would always hear about these kids, for people who had a lot of money, is that you would hear these litigations, and now the everyday man, this litigation going on is like, what is this?
Yeah, that's it. And I remember back in the day, my mother obviously was a lot younger then too, but we talked about, so she bought that house, and I actually spent my teenage years there. Went through graduate. I actually have 3 graduate degrees and a doctorate, believe it or not. But
Wow.
Went through school, was totally poor, but lived in the had like an attached like garage apartment type thing. And we split the expenses. It was great. But when I got to be full-time faculty, the house next door to her this house went up for sale. And it was so weird because I was walking one of my pugs down the alley past this house. And I actually heard this little internal voice say, and it was in my voice. That's what's so weird. But it said, "You should buy that house." It wasn't I should buy that house. It was you should buy that house. And it was one of those feelings. Now, I don't get a lot of this stuff, but either a higher level of thinking, somebody was sure showing up. And I wasn't even thinking about it at the time. But I actually got this at the end of the real estate bust, and it was on short sale. So thank God for that, because there's no way I could get a house today. But it was really kind of interesting because at one point we were talking about having me added to her mortgage because I'm her only heir. And she actually said, "Well, what if you get sued?" Right? I mean, that was one of the things that, was coming out.
Normally you wouldn't worry about things like that.
That's it. So, I mean, it has been really interesting. And again, with videos coming out, social media, and a wider acceptance, it's interesting. And for a while, I think that I used to call it buddy ghost syndrome. I think people wanted to be haunted so that they would be kind of special. If you're a part of the contemporary services, take no offense, but I link it to the buddy God phenomenon, where God's your friend, right? So you have these, this imaginary friend, that's super, special friend. And, I still think that's even part of our cultural shift, where we've moved away from the agrarian and packed ourselves into these cities. And the psychological response is that we're lonelier than ever, which I think is really interesting. Social media has brought us together and split us apart. And, that you have this non-social, like private friend in your household.
Let me ask you something, Brandy, especially with your background academics. There's sometimes things that also this thing with the ghost and the paranormal. I mean, it's always been around. Don't get me wrong. You've had it spiritism. You've always had that. But anyway, now that as technology advances and everything gets so exact and we're observed, I think that we long for the mysterious. To go against this technology where everything is examined, everything is exact, everything is filmed.
I agree. And I think, religion has dissolved out. It's dissolving very rapidly in this country since the 70s, and people, I think we want that extra connection. I mean, I would hate to think that this is it. I mean, and I don't think this is it. I definitely think there's much more out there, but, even the whole Matrix stories, right, are almost kind of doing the same thing, the glitch in the Matrix, that we're just part of a computer simulation. And I find it interesting that scientists are coming out with that now. And I'm like, okay. I mean, they've been coming out, but yet another article just came out about how a scientist has proof that we're just simulations. I'm like, well, I want a better programmer next time.
Well, and I think the human nature, we kind of there's some people that are, I don't know, because to me it's like kind of dystopian, that view of existence. And I think part of us yearns for, the Indiana Jones in us wants to do something that is, whether it's the exploration or something that's not exact, like, technology where everything...
and deals with the mysterious, right? So
the mysterious, exactly.
Always has that episode where you're going back in time, or the crystal skull, or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
That was a movie, but it is very interesting. yeah, and of course the other thing that I find interesting is the parallel between the rise of spiritualism and then kind of the millennialism that hit in the 90s, and the interesting in technology and ghosts at the same time, because you see such parallels. So spiritualism will sometimes say it was formed in the full light of technology, and of course one thing that they were using were the old-fashioned cameras, but these things weren't understood and could certainly be abused by photographers. That definitely happened with some of the spirit photography. I won't say all, but some of it, absolutely.
Sure.
Until, the frauds are kind of pointed out, and then, the religion takes this big hit. But it reminds me of the early 2000s when digital cameras were coming out. And I was a poor graduate student. I didn't get my first digital camera till at least 2002, maybe 2004. It was much later. And by golly, that thing had, for a card, it actually had a disc. It had one of those square discs, like the old-fashioned floppy disk.
Yep.
And it took like 15 pictures, and then it died. The battery would be drained, and it couldn't hold anymore. But the interesting thing is all of a sudden this burst in orb images. And so historically speaking, with technology coming in, we see ghosts transform. So the whole idea, for example, in the 1800s of the phantasmic, a phantasm was something that they had learned to do kind of like still projections onto a wall. And so the ghosts started looking like like transparent beings. Right? In the Middle Ages, ghosts were oftentimes solid, or they could have a contact with you. You go back further and you find ghosts are like the breath. So Achilles tries to embrace the dead Patroclus and his arms go through him. The same thing with Gilgamesh and Enkidu. But nonetheless, you had the phantasm that developed, and the image of the ghost changed with that. And so you start seeing these see-through type figures, which helps to inspire spiritualism and the double exposures. But then we get to the 21st century, and everybody has digital cameras, but we don't know how they work.
Right.
So, people are taking pictures. I got so many orb images, and I remember.
Oh my God, it was what I look at some of these old shows.
Yeah,
when they do that, when they captured an orb, and they're like, "Oh my God, the orb, the proof." And now it's like an orb. Oh yeah, yippee! All right.
Well, not only that, but it's so easy to disprove, right?
Exactly.
So I know there was a point in which I had to go through the Spirits of St. Pete website and take down all of the orb images because I'm like, oh, it's not proof. But again, it was that lack of understanding, right? So I'm kind of curious to see it, because the technology becomes popularized and more people have access to it, but they don't have necessarily the mindset to understand that your flash field and your lens are too close together, and anything in front of it will be illuminated, thus producing an orb, right? So, I'm kind of curious to see what happens. Well, actually, I've already seen the next phase, and that is at-home security cameras. So now people will send us all of this footage, or if you watch Paranormal Caught on Camera, like 3/4 of those, I'm like, oh my God, it's a bug.
Let me tell you something. I have a cottage on my property, and I have one of those little cameras right there, just basically because I could tell if it's on the other side, so if somebody does a delivery or something. And one time I have it up, the screen on my phone, and I see something, and I look at it, and I was like, what in the hell is that? It was a lizard running over the lens, and all of a sudden I really looked at it, I said, wait a minute, that's the body of the lizard. But it's like stuff like that.
Well, and folks don't understand, particularly with the infrared cameras, that they produce heat that attracts insects. Depending on how you have it set up, it can be different speeds for the camera. So we actually had a case in Clearwater, in which this woman she was selling her house because she was convinced it was haunted. And what convinced her was she had all of these, all around the perimeter of her house, she had all these security cameras. And when we first looked at the footage, I'm like, wow, that really does kind of look like a shadow figure going across her lawn.
Right.
So we agreed to come out and check it out, see what it was. And this is where you do need to be viable on the property. And it turns out that her cameras, we didn't know where they had been positioned, but when we got there, it was so obvious that they were positioned and they were attracting, and these little shadow figures were little tiny, and they were elongated bugs. They weren't even, I don't even know if they were a type of moth, because usually it can tell a moth. but they were crossing the lens. And this woman literally had 4 journals, 4 notebooks full. She would watch these security cameras and she would document anything that she thought was paranormal.
Much time on her hands.
And so her partner basically tried to explain to her that this was natural.
Right.
She didn't believe her.
Oh, no, having none of that, huh?
No. And it was, she had all of this stuff around her house, all of these things for barriers from ghosts, and it was like, she didn't even believe us. I mean, we're literally taking her outside and saying, but do you see where you have this position?
Right. But she yeah, this was her. Yeah. Uh-huh.
And so, plus she had there was a crack running through the house. So I think there was a problem with the foundation, but can't really say that. But it was really, really very interesting. And so the latest thing has been people sending us video clips from their security cameras. And, I have somebody who will literally take them down to the frame. I
wish I had time for that. I wouldn't have time for that.
Bless your heart. I mean, I'm telling you, it really makes a difference when you have. And unfortunately, the best kind of paranormalist is usually like the retired or the part-time worker. So I'm like, man, that's tough these days, where you have to have $94,000 to survive. And I'm not making that up. That's the number they said for Florida. And I'm like, oh my God, I am so poor. But it's really very, very fascinating. And we've even had folks that wanted attention who are, you go frame by frame and you actually see their hand, like they're moving their hand out.
I had a case. This was in, I want to say it was West Palm Beach. And this was, by the way, this is still when people were taking pictures. Mm-hmm. And she's a nice house. That had a nice development too. And she's telling me, oh, I'm getting messages written on my bathroom mirrors. And I'm like, okay. And then we're talking there. And this is when you developed film.
Yeah.
And she's showing me, you remember when people get the red eye?
Yes.
Okay. She's showing me this picture where she's looking up and she's getting red eyes, because of the flash.
Yeah.
And she's showing it to me like, hey, I think I'm getting possessed. And I'm looking at her like, you got to be kidding me, lady. In other words, she was making something out of nothing just because the picture was she's sitting at the dining room table and she looks up because that would only happen at a certain angle where she had that red eye look, and to her it was like, hey, and I looked at her and I go, well, I was like, okay. In other words, her credibility went right there because again, like what you were saying, they become invested in this story that they've got going. Mm-hmm. And if you come along and try to tell them, that's not exactly accurate, all of a sudden you're not on their side anymore.
Mm-hmm. It's that belief bias, right? We just, I was telling you earlier, we had this case where this woman was sending us stuff and claiming, she needed help immediately and she wouldn't write anything down, but she had to talk to us. And I mean, it was crazy. I mean, she even filled out our form and just said, you have to talk to me. And I'm like, okay. And so I actually had a couple of, because for me, I'm like, okay, these are all red flags right here. But, I sent it to my team. I'm like, if anybody wants to try and tackle this, that's okay. I mean, we do try to help people and try to be compassionate, but I'm like, the level of urgency, the lack of communication. And then she sent pictures of proof. And I'm like, I actually don't see anything.
One of those.
Yep. And sure enough, she went through all of these stories. I had 2 investigators who were working with her on Zoom calls, and she went through all of this stuff. And she sent them videos, and my one investigator went through all of them, sent her like 1-paragraph answers on each video saying, well, this is a shadow cast by, whatever it is. And the woman wrote back and she was very upset, and she and wouldn't believe us. And it was really interesting because their next question was, because I've done this, and I'm like, you get to a point in the conversation where you just have to end it because it's going to start becoming defensive.
Yes.
And at this point, if you're not agreeing with her, she's not going to see all
Right.
of your rational
She's
explanation.
looking for somebody to come and reinforce, like
That's
to
it.
like tell her you're right. Yes, there's definitely haunted inside. And
So
I've run across those scenarios when you got to break the news to them that there isn't anything supernatural, and they look at you like, what? And
yeah.
it's like, yeah, well,
So it was that kind of thing, and the head person who was doing this said, "Well, what should I? What do you want us to do?" And one of them said, or the other, because they were just kind of keeping me in the loop, which is great. The other one said, "Well, maybe we should have a Zoom session, and you can talk with her,
and
and
you're
then we
like,
can
no,
tell her about protections." And I ended up saying, yeah, this it won't work. I would not recommend it. I mean, you are welcome to do what you feel is best, because they were taking over the case, and or not taking over, but they were dealing with it on our behalf. And I like I said, too many red flags, and I was just like,
right. They don't.
okay,
Sometimes people don't realize that the person doesn't really want the investigation for the sake of the investigation.
they
They're
want
looking for somebody to basically give validity, like,
what they're
and of
experiencing.
course you're supposed to be the expert, as in the paranormal investigator.
So it was one of those things where I said, well, this would be my recommendation. I mean, we want to be polite, but you need to kind of wrap this up now.
Yes.
Rather than invest more time into this where she's not going to listen to you, and then it makes us sound defensive because she's going to attack what we're saying is rational.
Yes.
You just have to say, well, I'm sorry, we really couldn't help you. From our perspective, we work with honesty and integrity, and unfortunately, these videos do not present us with anything that we consider paranormal. You have to kind of also give that person the out. This is
Right.
where we are. This is our perspective, and just kind of end it there. But yeah, it is.
Some people don't. They're really not open minded when they ask for an investigation. They're so convinced
Yeah.
that, and I've been shown photographs that did you see that at the window? And I'm looking at it, and I'm like, I don't see anything. I mean, this could be a reflection from the glass. It could be a curtain that,
Sure.
it could be anything. And they're like, yeah, don't you see the little girl behind it? I was like, no. It's like, no, this
Or
can be
it's
explained by a
interesting,
million things,
Yeah, or when they tell you, do you see the little girl? And then you see
Sure.
the little girl, and you're like, well, that's called suggestion. So,
Yeah.
or the pixelation when people it's not as much these days, although I still see some of it, but people would like super like enlarge their images, and you get
Yes.
this image and you're like, I don't really see anything but pixels.
Yes.
So
Right,
it's,
exactly. And you're just putting that. It could be anything. It could be.
it is.
And that's one of the things I've mentioned, because a lot of people think that paranormal investigators will fall for anything. And I say, I beg to differ. My bar is set very high. When it comes to proof,
Yeah.
I don't fall for it unless it's something clear cut. I don't accept it. In some cases, I'm thinking maybe, but unless it's really definitive, like as in a picture or something, it's got to be really clear. Otherwise, I'm going to put it in the, no, that's not supernatural.
Well, and it's weird to actually have to come up with the phrase,
Yes.
thank you so much for contacting us, but from, again, kind of that soft, response, but still saying, no, it's not paranormal. I tell folks when they ask me about the paranormal and, how do you feel about it? I tell them, I feel like I burst a lot of bubbles over the years,
Yes.
and so it's,
yes.
but you have to do it with some compassion, because
of course.
If people are reaching out to you and they're concerned, or they feel, there was this one woman who had a picture of, it was pretty obvious. It was like something right in front of the lens. And actually, I had this with a member of the spirits team years ago. We had a manifestation of Mary on a building in Clearwater, if you remember that. And I took my team, and we couldn't get an official investigation, but we brought our equipment and we checked it out, and I actually wrote a newspaper article about it, and I got to interview the people that were in there, and I got to interview our local bishop, who was like, no, we don't consider it miraculous. There's enough there that the history wise, we know that it's most likely, and this was from the Catholic Church.
Right. No, yeah, people don't realize that they're tougher to crack than anybody else, to
Seriously,
be honest.
I used to do study abroads to Rome. I got to teach world religions in like 14 days in Rome. It was awesome because we would go down to the papacy to St. Peter's, and I'd be like, and our guest speaker today is the Pope. So how many
Wow.
other teachers can do that? You know, because he would come out and talk to the crowds, but I count that as a guest speaker.
Sure.
But we actually got to meet one of the Vatican officials, who is basically one of the miracle busters. And he actually told us a story about how there was a woman in, I think it was New Jersey, who was claiming that one of her statues was crying olive oil. And they came out, they took a sample, they analyzed it, they took another sample, it was matching up. But I guess she ran out of that type or could not get that type of olive oil or didn't realize what they were doing to research it. And so the third sample, lo and behold, was a different type of olive oil.
Right.
And so they're actually quite rational. But I still remember going out to the Mary image, and this we were taking pictures of it, and one of the investigators swears she got an angel wing in her picture. And I'm like, but it's a square shape. I think she had a pen in her hand. And it's the pen cap that she was trying to move it out of the way when she was taking the picture. Right. But angel wings aren't square. And she would never acknowledge that, never acquiesced. And even she was on the team for a little while, like 3 or 4 years. And she came from a science background, which I thought was interesting. And even later on, she was like, well, I know we had that disagreement. I'm like, disagreement? Oh, I couldn't even remember it. It was the angel wing thing. And she just adamantly believed. And unfortunately, again, there's nothing you can really do in that case.
So you can believe it is, but that doesn't mean I'm going to believe it is. And we'll just agree to disagree and let's move on with it. Because
and that's it. And that's where it does get to be kind of hard. I mean,
don't you remember when you say that, you remember in Conyers, Georgia, back in the 90s, that they had like also an apparition of Mary?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I went there. I visited. I went and I visited. Just so happened I went on a weekday. I was out there doing something else. I had a chance to swing by. It was like in the morning, in the middle of the weekday. Nobody was out there. But you'd be surprised how many things people left out there. Because you remember that there was a time where the Catholic Church was like, no. And there was somebody that she was supposedly going into trance, she could see it, something like all these other Marian apparitions and
like stuff. The 70s where they started channeling
and all this stuff, and it was incredible.
It was it really
how many people. And by the way, I'm not as a matter of fact, it died away. I don't know whatever happened to that, the Conyers, Georgia thing with the apparition of Mary. I don't know that it died out. I never heard anything about it, but people willing, how can I say it, it's not that. Because obviously, look what I have in back of me. I have a picture. This is from Botticelli. Okay. But to me, it's like, if I'm going to believe something, I really want to know this is the for real thing. I don't want to be swept along with the crowd. You see what I'm saying? And get all worked up. And it's some poor lady having this fantasy, that she's seeing a Marian, a visitation or something. It's like, but it was incredible. The place was flooded with
it was
things that people leave behind and all these things. And
well, the funny thing was that the building ended up selling to a group that made rosaries. So it was a church group.
Okay.
But I interviewed them as well, and they believed it was Mary. And it was so funny because I said, well, so how are you documenting this? And they said, well, we had at least one miracle here. There was a woman that had a case of varicose veins, and she came to the Mary image and she made homage. And the next day her veins were gone. The varicose veins were gone. I was like, okay. I mean, I don't know how to explain that, but
exactly.
But it was so wild. That was their miracle. And of course, what really got to be tragic is that the Mary image was on glass, and some teenagers shot it out, and so that ended the entire episode. They shot out the head of the glass, and it was gone. They had a BB gun and destroyed it. And I was like, well, there's Florida. There's Florida. I know.
That's and I know in some cases, a lot of the people also that come and, because for anybody that's thinking this does fall under the umbrella of the paranormal, sometimes there's people that have like serious health problems for themselves or a family member, and they go to these things like wanting to find, some type of
The
cure.
placebo effect, yeah.
Yeah, especially if their medical is only taking them so far.
Mm-hmm.
They're being treated, but they want a cure kind of situation. And which is, I think, is a sad part because, especially if they're being misled on purpose. How's that?
Yeah, that's for sure. And it's not to say that spontaneous healings aren't miraculous.
Oh,
It's
of
just,
course.
but it was so interesting, to kind of hear their justification. And over the years, I did interview other people, and they remember driving past the building when it was a used car lot. I'm like, well, that would be interesting for Mary to show up at a used car
Sure.
lot building, but
Yeah,
they had
exactly. Like,
painted a nativity on the side of it. They also discovered the image when they cut down a palm tree. And of course, it's that special filmy glass that
yes.
mineral water basically interacts with. And there was a sprinkler there. So, I mean, it was discounted, but it was really interesting to see just how active the area was. But to me, it was that picture from that one investigator who swore,
Right.
and I'm like, you're on my team and you're not, you come from a science chemistry background, and
Yeah. It goes to
how
show
can
you,
not
right?
see? It's a pen cap. It's white. It's squared off, but it's rounded at the top. So
Right, exactly. Yeah, that's what you find.
so
Some of the most hardcore skeptics are in reality they're disguised and they're really
believer.
like a believer wanting to believe.
That's it.
Yeah, it happens a lot.
So
More than people think.
it's and I think that's where the field is sometimes so challenging,
Yes.
because as I said, I tend to play well in my own sandbox. I over the years, I don't know, they're weird. I'm the weird one, maybe. I don't
Yes.
know. Maybe I'm
Yeah.
the normal
No.
one that they're weird. But
Yes.
I just find sometimes it is easier to find a small group of like-minded people.
Yes.
I've stayed away from a lot of the other paranormal teams because it got to be
Yes.
so brutal in the field.
Yeah. Paradrama.
Oh my gosh. I mean, I remember people there was one location we investigated that made the newspaper locally. And we investigated it a series of 3 times in 2 years. And then they closed it to all investigations because they were so inundated. The TV shows had come out.
Oh,
And
there you go.
there were teams that were trying to backstab us. And it was just like, this is,
Yeah.
it's,
They were, and that's what I tell them. All these, again, after the TV shows, the sensationalism. It's not like you're not getting no paranormal investigation. You're just getting somebody that wants to capture the proof, or hopefully not manufacture the proof. And
But
let
that
me
was
ask you:
it.
have you come across? Because at one point, I want to say there was a time, whether it was a restaurant or a hotel, which did not want to be known as being haunted. Once upon a
Yes.
time, then fast forward, that's changed because some businesses now they want to be investigated so that they could claim they are haunted.
And I've not only seen that, I've seen them reverse back out of that. So one of
Really?
our local buildings here is the Vinoy, right? And
Okay.
the
I've been to the
ghost
Vinoy.
hunters were at the Vinoy. Yes.
I stayed at the Vinoy. That was
Uh,
back like in '09, something like that. Yes.
oh yeah. This is like during the craze. I actually got to stay in the haunted room.
Okay.
My birthday came up, and at that time, my mother asked me what I wanted. I'm like, I want a haunted room at the Vinoy, and she actually knew somebody who did community outreach, and I was able to stay there for like $100 for the night.
Okay.
And the thing is that I came in as a complete skeptic because I really thought that the Vinoy had just built all of this up, and
Right.
I did not watch the Ghost Hunters. I just did not care for the show. I'm not a fan, not a super fan, not a fan at all. In fact, I really feel like in some ways they kind of ruined the field because they sensationalized it. But
Yes.
whatever, I may be alone in that. But so I actually did stay in the haunted room, and I had my investigators come in. We had dinner. We walked through the hotel together, and I was so excited because it was a king size bed, and I went to.
You're like, this is great.
Oh my gosh! Well, I have, as we talked about earlier, I have 6 pugs and a puggle, so 6.5 pugs, if you will. And of course, they all sleep on the bed with me. And so what ends up happening is I get this much of the bed, and they have the rest. And it's very relaxing. Don't get me wrong, it really is. But I wake up in the morning, and I've got pugs, and I'm in a pretzel shape, and they're all around me. So I'm like, all right, king size bed. And I tried to go to sleep. I mean, I tried, but I really felt like there was somebody pacing in that room. And it turns out it really was the hotbed room. I have no explanation for that. I did leave a recorder, and I left the room for a time and came back. You can actually hear some rustling sounds in there. I did not turn off the lights, however, and it turns out in order to get the closet, because there's a famous closet door that opens up, to get that to open, you have to turn off the lights. I found that out later. But
And you're like, whoa. I did.
I was there. I didn't know this. But the interesting...
It dates back to, what is it, like the 1920s? Is that
1925, yeah. January 1925. It took them 9 months to build. It was about $3 million, which was big money in the 20s.
Yes.
So anyway, so I got to stay in the haunted room, and I am not one who normally gets spooked, but man, oh day, and I have no explanation for that agitation, because I was like, this will be great. I'll enjoy this great hotel. But all night, I would kind of doze off, and I would just have the sensation that there was somebody pacing from the back, from the bathroom, past the bed to the closet, back and forth. And they were just really irritated that I was there. And I'm like, okay, this is odd. But the interesting thing is that kind of after the the Ghost Hunters episode, and a few years after I stayed in the haunted room, I would call or we'd take the history tour. And anytime we brought up anything about the ghost, they totally backpedaled. They didn't want to talk about it, or you would feel this eerie cold coming from not the ghost, but the tour director. And it was just like they shut the door on it. You barely hear about it anymore. I mean, people know about it because of word of mouth, but I haven't seen the Ghost Hunters episode aired or anything else. But it's interesting that there was such a step back from it.
Did you ever get to visit the Bellevue, the Biltmore, the one before they renovated it?
Yes, I did. And I have a sad story about that one, because I would call the Bellevue. We do not do investigations unless we're allowed to be there. And I mean, they would do rude things. Like I was on hold one time for like 35 to 40 minutes. They wouldn't even, they were like, we'll talk to somebody. And either they forgot I was there or they didn't want to talk about it. And I think I tried. I tried maybe 3 or 4 times to see if we could come in, because we wanted to come in with permission. They wouldn't return the call, or I'd be on hold and nobody would answer. I'm like, okay. So all of a sudden, in the middle of nowhere, they brought in a paranormal team from Orlando. And I'm like,
hello.
Okay. And they offered $400 weekend packages, and they would put you in a haunted room. They were going to.
What happened? What about your local ghost hunter here?
Yeah, I'm like, academic, been doing this for a while anyway. But this is about 2 years before they ended up converting the hotel, and they had like a paranormal weekend, and they brought in, I want to say maybe 40 people. And I brought I had 3 other spirits members, and we split a room. And this was awful. This was just absolutely one of the worst events. I was so upset I would not even post it. I never put it up on the spirits page because I didn't know at the time they were going to, shut down or anything. But the first thing that happened was when I got to the room, there was a blackbird, because I was the first one there. There was a blackbird that was trapped in the room, and it was slamming itself against the wall. I couldn't catch this thing. I'm like an animal person. I'm like calling the front desk, like, oh my God, you've got to do something, because this thing, and I'm trying to sit still, and this poor thing was trapped in there. They had to come and get it and get it out. I don't even know how it got in there, but that poor thing. I'm like, okay, that's interesting. That night, they actually did a tour of the haunted 5th floor, I believe it was. Oops, I just dropped that.
Right, yes.
And the first thing was that they didn't have power to go there, and they had 2 people that were disabled.
Oh.
So they couldn't go. The second thing was that they had us all sign off on waivers. Okay. They didn't do a head count. And then before we started, they said, if you feel like something is possessing you, let it happen.
What?
And I'm like, What? First of all, exactly same thing. If somebody has a psychological condition, that can exacerbate it. Secondly, no, you don't want people to be possessed by anything on a tour.
Yeah, they wanted. I guess they wanted the big moment, the aha moment, like, oh, somebody's getting possessed. That's great.
So then we get up to the 5th floor, and it is literally, it's all of us in this area. So all photos had to be basically discarded because they were picking up so much dust, and we could not do EVPs. I mean, we tried, but we had to discount a lot of it. They literally had nails sticking out of the floorboards up.
What?
Oh, yeah. There were holes in the wall. There was literally air coming in. There was no power. And at the end, as I said, they didn't do a head count. And there was, and I call these folks hottie toddies, these women in the very, 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 very tight dresses. I'm not quite sure what her profession might have been. I mean, it was that kind of outfit. And I don't want to make a judgment call. But she was on the tour, drunk, and she disappeared with the security guard.
Oh my God, that's great. I'm sorry, I have to laugh because I'm sure you didn't think it was funny then, but
well, and they didn't do a head count. They didn't know how many people were up there, and they were expected to lock the 5th floor.
Don't tell me they locked them up there?
No, I don't know what happened after that, but the thing was they didn't know where they were. They didn't know how many people. I mean, I was so astounded, and it was just such a comedy of errors. So I ended up, as I said, I refused to publicize it. I was that upset over it. I mean, I should have, but it was just so badly done. And I was really insulted. They brought in a team from Orlando and just really insulted at the lack of integrity organization. Yeah. And it was just such a money grab, in the end. But yeah, I did get to do it. It was a shame. And in fact, the interesting thing is that those entities might have extended out to some of the townhomes in the area.
Really?
Yeah, there were some haunted townhomes out there, and we got some nice EVPs, male entity being one of them. But that was a while back as well. That was before the new townhomes were built.
Right, because this hotel goes back, and I had heard that because I stayed there. I stayed on the 4th floor, and I know the 5th floor, and they were saying, originally on the 5th floor was where, the servants, these were very wealthy families. They would have their traveling servants with them.
Yeah.
And this is where they would stay or,
And there was a fire and there was the wedding tree and that type of thing.
Did you hear anything? I heard that there was supposedly, how down in I think it was the men's bathroom, they had, where they had those shoe shine chairs. Mm-hmm. I had heard that there was a haunting connected to that, but I never found out exactly what the origins of it were.
I don't remember that one. I do remember the servants' quarters or the slave quarters, depending on who you talk to, underneath the building. They had a fire break out.
I didn't know that.
Or there was an area, and that was supposed to be really haunted. And that's what produced most of the ghosts there. But
what do you think about the reputation? And this is, to me, it kind of sounds like urban mythish about Maisie Plant running around trying to find her jewelry or something like that.
Oh, there's lots of those. Yeah, there are tons of that type of thing where they are definitely, just exaggerated urban legends. But it has, oh my gosh, 25 years. It's really been quite a ride, come to think of it. But just all of the, the oddities that you come across, and these are almost always the exceptions. I mean,
yes.
The reason you keep doing paranormal investigation is because you have those families that you help, and you have those individuals that you help, and you have the properties and the entities, that settle out, and everybody is feeling better. And in fact, I have had a couple of folks that I've run into, because now the nice thing about having a studio is that I have like a public space, or public-ish space. It's privately owned building, but we open up for Second Saturday Art Walk, and so it turns out if you're there long enough, I think you encounter everybody you ever met at some point. I don't know. Like, there's folks from like 20 years ago that show up, and so we actually got to do a recheck on a home that we checked 18 years ago.
Wow! And
this was interesting because the first time there were 3 people living in the home. The daughter was 12 years old, And the husband and the daughter felt like they were encountering an old woman who had died on the property.
Okay.
We had a little bit of phenomenon, but ultimately we thought it was a residue. 18 years later, the daughter is 30 and has moved out and has her own kids. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm that old. Okay. The husband passed away. He actually, and boy, it was not an easy passing away. He had a hip surgery and I guess ended up with an infection that literally, I mean, he was on antibiotics. It took him 5 years, but it was awful. It did not sound very pleasant. But he died not in the house, but his last years were in the house, and he ended up
this is
dying.
where he lived.
Like the last 3 days, I think he was in the hospital and passed away. The weird thing was that I intentionally did not look at any cases because, if you do enough cases, they all kind of blend together. 18 years ago, I can remember yesterday if I'm lucky, So essentially, I actually, when I got there, was like, well, this does look familiar, but I initially thought it was a different case that we had done in the area. But I'm like, but I can't say anything, and we're just going to I'm going to let the others lead the investigation. But the original, the wife still lived in this home, so it was still her house. And she's like the only, still lasting person there. And it was relatively modern, post World War II, 1950s construction, cute little house. And so we get in there and, as I said, I told the others, I was like, well, you guys are going to have to leave because if I have any remembrance, I don't want to be influencing anything. So I will follow you. And they started picking up almost immediately in the master bedroom a male presence, difficulty breathing and nausea, weight of the world. He was just like really exhausted, coughing. And it turns out, as we kind of went through almost everything that they picked up, and again, we didn't know this, but it had belonged to the husband at some point.
Oh, I was thinking, oh my God, he's became one of the ghosts.
Yes. And the weird thing was that the old lady presence that we had investigated, I guess he continued to see her, particularly as he got ill and started to decline. Literally, she would come and talk to him. And the wife said that he was like throwing water bottles at her to get her out.
Wow.
Well, and again, I didn't know this until the end, but a couple of my team members picked up on a female presence, but it was very, very brief. Very brief.
Okay.
But at the very end, when the reveal happened, sure enough, it was supposed to be the husband. It was not, unfortunately, a very happy marriage at the end. But almost everything that we picked up on, it had a connection to him. We had no paranormal activity. The wife would say, he hated it if you closed the kitchen cabinets in the wrong way because it made a noise that he didn't like. We even, she said, I will find these cabinets like slammed closed. So we even tried that. He wouldn't interact with us at all. No communication, just that sensation of presence. So it was really, really interesting. And I ended up saying, I even tried to say, do you remember us from before? We even tried some EVPs with her there. Once we had the reveal, we got nothing. And I said, well, what did he think of our investigation all those years ago? And she said, well, he was skeptical. But, after you left, he was a believer. And it was kind of interesting because, again, the same format. You don't tell us what's going on. We come in. But the weird thing was that we did investigate the property again, and now we have more access to archives, much better archival data. Newspaper subscriptions have put, 200 years worth of articles up. And so my researcher, it was so funny because she sent me this, she said, I can't find anything. Here are the 3 names of the homeowners. One of them died at the age of 87. Well, it turns out that was the homeowner that everybody thought was haunting the house. And it was an urban legend that she had, it became a legend that she had died on the property. She had not. She died at Nice Hospital.
Okay.
But, we were able to actually say, well, she's probably still there because she had a lingering illness. But it's a residue. It's really not very active right now. But it's the husband. That
is so interesting that you actually are. That's very rare, by the way.
It was weird. Just
be able to go back to a place that you investigated almost 20 years before, and now this time one
It's a
of
new
the
person.
persons. It's like,
Yes.
wow.
So I don't know why he wouldn't communicate with us. I mean, we really did try to be pretty gentle, but as I said, the wife, did indicate that I guess he was kind of a little bit mean spirited, I guess is how you'd say it. So, maybe because we would be validating the wife, he wasn't going to do anything.
Could
I was
be.
like,
You
wow.
never know.
I mean,
You
it was
never
so
know.
funny to even.
You're on her side, or
That's
those
it.
deals.
That's it. And it was funny because she's like, he hated candles, scented candles, so she had them all over the house. I'm like, well, so we're having making sure everything's.
You're doing battle, and he died,
That
but
was
you
it.
still are doing battle.
Well,
Wow.
and because she would have on occasion, she would have dreams where he was like standing in the bedroom saying, I guess she had found like $1,800 of cash that he had stashed away. So like in this dream, he showed up and he's like, I want my cash back. And
There you go.
he was hoarding at one point. And so when he passed away, I mean, she said it took a lot of time to get everything out. And, I want all
he
my
was
stuff
really
back.
probably mad about that. He might have just stayed behind just because of that.
Yeah.
What are you doing with all my stuff?
That was what was so interesting was these dreams where he was like, I want it all back. You didn't have any right to do that. And she's like, so, I said, well, if he's here, you just need to keep reminding him it's your house. And she's like, oh yes, I do that. He hated nails in the wall. So she had the wall covered in pictures. And I'm just like,
there you go.
Yep. You're certainly showing him. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it was kind of neat too, at the same time, at the end where I'm like, oh God, no, this really was a different case. I was definitely misremembering. So I know I wasn't leading the group on because I really thought it was a different case. And it was really interesting that the investigators, our equipment didn't get anything, but our sensitives did. And what they got was actually fairly accurate. And that's always kind of weird. And then to finally, kind of say, well, the lady didn't die on the property, but,
But you know what? She lived there. She lived there. Yeah. This is the thing that people think that, technically you could pass away in a hospital.
There.
Yeah.
But it was interesting.
This is where she existed. How's that?
That's it. But I guess the weird thing was that her husband had initially bought the house, and then she married him, and they were both on the house after that on the deed. But it was interesting because he had been told that she died on the property, and I think that was where his little kernel of belief was that she was haunting it. And as I said, the archival research really didn't show us, back in the day. But now that we have, access to obituaries and just, articles and all sorts of property records, it was really interesting that that it came back. And we were like, well, he was wrong on that. They told him incorrectly. Nobody did die on the property. But, we have proof of this lady, and this is probably who you're dealing with, or who he was dealing with. But like I said, she's pretty well gone, I think.
And I probably ran her off.
Well, except that she, according to the wife, he saw her a lot when he was so sick and dying. So again, the question is, did he actually see her, or was she, something in his mind, or was he, kind of in between worlds, and maybe he was interacting with her.
Would you hear that a lot? People that work in hospitals. Yeah. They describe where sometimes they'll know when a patient's going to pass on because they'll start having conversations with people, people that have passed on, family members. That's their heads up. Even if that person might not necessarily be sick or have anything, that they know that something is going to happen because they start seeing or having that conversation. Like you said, in between worlds kind of thing.
Yeah, where you're kind of seeing between the veil. And it, in some ways, it's kind of, if it is part of the mind dealing with death and dying and keeping you calm, I guess that's one thing. But, on the other hand, I always find it interesting because sometimes these are people that you're not expecting, and so it doesn't make sense why this would be the person, unless it is completely like some sort of buried psychological element. It's also very comforting. I kind of hope that there is somebody that's like, it'll be okay. It'll be okay. Some of my very favorite stories, I remember one woman was dying, and right before she died, she sat up and she threw her arms up like this. And she said, oh, it's licorice. And people are like, and then she died. And they're like, licorice? Well, it turns out that licorice had been her childhood horse.
Wow.
And so you're just kind of like, okay, I have had a multitude of pugs, and so my people are like, you have like a section in heaven that's just like the Stark pugs. I'm like, okay, they all better be there.
It's a flock of pugs that are coming to get you.
I'm pretty sure that will be what happens. And of course, it's as I mentioned, my mother is 80, and bless her heart, because she is an interesting person in and of herself. She's right before the baby boom generation, but I'm pretty sure she had me to have a friend. She just always kind of struck me because she's always been very different in some ways, like very determined, very assertive, very intelligent, and but I think she's been lonely. So sometimes I do wonder, it could be that baby boom thing where the kids become the friends. But it's interesting because she's been dying since she's like 65, if you will. So she had her funeral set up. She updates her funeral folder. Like, okay. Right. But I'm kind of curious to see what happens. She seems to be in good health right now. Yeah. I'm keeping her at home, but she's going to be a very hard loss. I mean, it's, the one person you know your whole life. But I kind of wonder who will come for her, because my father has passed on. He was one of the most active encounters I ever had. And like I said, it's always family. Her brother has passed on, and that was a weird story in and of itself. But I kind of wonder, if her parents will come for her father.
So she's outlived all her significant others besides you, is what you're saying.
I'm it. I'm her. She's my only family. I'm her only family. So it's really going to be hard, because I'll be darned, man, if she didn't develop a sense of humor when she got older. And I'm like, where's this been your whole life? But, we're dealing with most likely moderate dementia anyway. But she's in good health. And as I said, I can keep her home. She comes with me on errands. We go grocery shopping. I try to keep her as engaged as possible.
Sure.
But I guess part of me, as this will eventually accelerate, is kind of curious to see, who comes for her, and, how comfortable, is it? And then, of course, she actually bought me, like, years ago, a Chinese ancestor house from ancient China. This is when China was still, like, allowing the export of supposed antiques that go back, hundreds of years. I've never had this thing tested. I probably should have a carbon date test, because I don't know for sure, because tourists are gullible, but I got this from an airline flight attendant who actually did study a great deal of Chinese history and apparently had pretty good connections. Or she got this for me. And my mother's already said, well, I'm going to move in there.
And you're like, oh, boy. Okay.
Oh, man. Well, I've already told her, because it has a little window cut in it. And I'm like, I'm putting up curtains. I am putting up curtains.
It's like, no.
So... But
you know what? I'll tell you what, when my mom passed away, she was like 90, 91. At the beginning, I was like, Mom, I don't want to see you. I was like worried, because I'm the only daughter. I'm in the same circumstances. I have half siblings, but I was the only daughter, and everything. And I was like, please, Mom, don't do this. I get it. We're good. Like, I don't want to see you. I don't want to wake up and here you are, like, trying to comfort me. I'm okay, and I know you're okay, because you lived a nice long life. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I haven't had that conversation with her yet, but it is on my agenda.
You know what? It's really funny, because my mom was the opposite. She never made any preparations. She never wanted to talk about, that conversation was verboten. Nope. We're just gonna pretend I'm gonna live forever. It's like, oh, okay, thanks. That kind of thing,
Well, it's so funny, because I'm like, she does not believe in the supernatural. She's softened over the years, a little bit, because she thinks I'm rational. And I'm like, well, thanks, Mom. That's, at least, I don't think I'm insane yet. But it has been really interesting with her. And of course, there have been, as I mentioned, this was kind of weird. We had a paranormal investigation, and there were, at this point in the spirit's, history, I was actually having folks meet me at my house, and I would drive us, so that they had no knowledge of where we were going. And it wasn't all investigators, just like one or two, just to keep that, that absolutely cold factor.
Right.
And I had two investigators who had met me at my mother's house, because at that point I was living in the back, and I was like, well, just meet me in her house, because it's, the car will be out front. And they came in and we were just chatting for a little bit. And one of the women was going through a hot flash. God bless her. So she's like, doing this. And my mother, man, she didn't turn the AC under 80 ever. So I'm like, I can't touch the AC, I'm sorry to tell you, but, I'll turn on the fan for you. And I still remember this to this day, because they started saying, as they were there, one of them said, does your mother know she's got a man in the house? And I'm like, I don't think she does. She's going to be thrilled. So
it's like, what?
She's describing this, he's kind of a big guy, and he's kind of got this reddish brown hair and a beard. And he's kind of like this, he's kind of, jolly. I don't want to say jolly. I can't remember what she called him, but, and I'm listening to this and I'm like, well, it kind of sounds like her estranged brother, because unfortunately when their parents died, they had a falling out and they hadn't spoken in 20, 30 years. And I'm like, it sounds a little bit like Uncle Ed, but how weird is that? And I said, well, are you getting a name? And she said, Tom. And I'm like, oh, I don't know a Tom. I don't think Mom knows a Tom. And she said something like, well, and he's a bit of a prankster. And it was kind of at this point where everything was coming together, and we had talked about the AC, and I was reaching up to turn on the fan because it had a pull cord, and the fan turned on by itself. And I'm like, okay. And we did the investigation. We came back, and that night I was, I made everybody go type up their notes immediately. So nothing, so I'm doing my job and I'm typing up my notes. And in the middle of it, I was so overwhelmed that I had to do research to see what happened to him. And so God bless the dial-up interweb, but I logged in and I put in his name, and an obscure newspaper popped up with his obituary. And he had passed away about 3 months before, and we had never been told. We had no knowledge. So, when it's something like that,
right. And at that point, you didn't even have any idea. You probably assumed he was alive.
I hadn't thought about it. I hadn't even thought about it in years. I'm out of the life. I mean, all that happened when I was 16. So it's things like that where and the other thing I remember is that she had a job that sent her out of town, and I had to sit on that information for like 8 hours until she came home, because I didn't want to tell her on the phone. Right. Because I mean, how do you even approach that? And
what did what was her reaction?
She never really acknowledged the supernatural part of it, but she couldn't deny the obituary. So
right.
The other thing that happened was my father passed away in 2012, and I honestly don't know how I exist. I find it ironic I'm a Gemini, because my parents were opposites. So, she came up with the feminist movement, and, liberal and Democrat, and he, pugs or canoids, and he was a cat guy and a Republican and conservative. So like I said, I'm like, how am I existing? I don't understand. And he was kind of an odd fellow. He was a civil engineer, and he was a Vietnam veteran, but, he actually did not get hurt in the war. That was another weird thing. But so the odd thing was that when he passed away, I had three things that happened, and almost every single two of the three, she was somehow with me. And so it's like he was trying to communicate with all of us. So they had divorced when I was very young, but they remained friendly, thank God. So there was no animosity. And, he would come over for, he'd fly down from Missouri. Sorry, I'm not a fan of the Midwest. But he would come down for holidays. And, I had visits over the summers, and, definitely kept in touch. It was an okay situation. But it was shortly after the funeral, and Mom and I were here in my house, and we were sitting in the study because I had a DVD player back when you had to have separate DVD players. And we were watching Perry Mason movies because my mom's a huge fan. And I remember looking at her and I said, you know what, for all of the things that were different, we do have some things in common. And I said, Perry Mason was pulp fiction. He started off as a pulp novel. And Dad and I both liked The Shadow. Dad would listen to him on the radio, and I was like hardcore into the 1930s Shadow, reprints of the Pulp Fiction.
Right.
And as soon as I said that, y'all are not allowed to judge me, please, but I had an action figure from the 1994 Shadow movie, which was a horrible movie, but it was the Alec Baldwin
Alec Baldwin, right?
And it has stood on that shelf. I mean, I'd lived here, at least a year. Nothing had ever happened. It's a one-story building. The pugs are lying down. There's no vibrations. This thing actually went whoop, off the shelf at that exact moment. I put it back. It's never done it again. But I'm like, okay. And I remember looking at her and she looked at me and, I'm like going through all these things. What could this be? What could this be? Nothing really checking off. I'm thinking, okay, maybe.
The timing is a little bit suspicious, if you know
what I mean.
Odd,
and he was fascinated with the paranormal investigations. He did like that. So, and I have to give my parents credit because they never told me I was crazy. I have degrees in religious studies and humanities, classics and history, liberal studies. They never once said, are you nuts? Why are you not going into business or anything like that? So, and they, for the most part, even though mom frowns a lot about the paranormal, she's never, I've not been forbidden, and my dad always liked it. And they've been supportive of the arts. I mean, and that's been great. So the second thing that happened was interesting because I was on the phone with her and I was his only heir. I had inherited his Saturn, and this was during the time that Saturn had the major recall, that the steering column could go out.
I remember that.
And nobody had this part. There were 2 or 3 Saturn dealerships, and I was trying. And the thing was that I have a Miata. I still have this Miata. This Miata will be 30 years old next year. So, and I love this car. But there was a period of 10 years where this Miata had no AC, which when you teach can be a little bit of a bummer because Florida is hot. And so you kind of, walk into the classroom pouring down with sweat, and the older I get, the more sensitive I am to humidity. Yay.
Yes.
So I love his car, because even though it was a yucky gray sedan, it had AC, and now I can't drive this car. And so I was so frustrated. And there was one day where I was here, I come home from teaching and I had gotten a letter from Saturn. And mom was at work and she had called in to see how I was doing. And I read the letter to her and I said, can you believe this? They're telling me to do this, this, and this. And I've already done that. And this letter is all chipper and perky and nice. And they are lying. And I was just like ranting about this letter. And I put it down on the kitchen counter and I turned around to get something out of a closet, essentially a little cabinet, kind of right around the corner. And as I turned around, I heard this little thump behind me. And I'm like, and I turned around, and in the middle of that letter was the Monopoly car token.
Oh, wow.
And I remember my mother saying, what is going on? I said, well, there's a car token on the letter. And you have to understand, I mean, unless the pugs have grown thumbs, I can't explain this. And there's no shelves. The Monopoly game, I had to go out and find it. It was in the garage under boxes, and it was sealed shut from humidity. I had to pry the box lid open.
That's incredible.
And at this point, I'm like recording, opening it. I'm like, look, it's not here.
So the actual piece wasn't in the box. It was not in the box.
And this Monopoly game was 40 years old, and I think Dad might have played it. I don't know how the heck he found it in that garage, but by God, he did. And so, and I have that Monopoly car. I have kept it. And to this day, I have no explanation for how that happened. But I think he was like, would you please stop complaining about the car?
Yeah, I was like, exactly.
That's enough. But the third thing that happened, and this was the last time, I had come home from getting groceries, and I was unloading them, and I was by myself in the house. Mom and I had gone out to go grocery shopping, and I'd come home and I was unloading everything, and I heard this scraping sound, like something scraping down the inside of the refrigerator, which was really weird, like a metal sound. I'm like, what in the heck? And I looked down, and underneath the vegetable drawer, there was this little gold coin, and I'm like, okay. And I went in and I pulled it out, and it was a Sacagawea coin.
Really?
One of the silver dollars. And what's really odd is that Dad and I are descended from Meriwether Lewis, who was on the expedition, right? The Lewis and Clark expedition that had Sacagawea as a leader.
Exactly.
I have no explanation for that.
I was going to say, that is, talk about the inside the refrigerator of all places.
I cannot figure out how this happened. There was no coinage. I had no, cash with me. I have no explanation for how that thing got there. And the odds that it was a Sacagawea coin. And I kind of thought, okay. And that was really the last time he really did.
And you would understand the significance, besides it being obviously like where they
be proud of the family line, be proud to be a Stark. And it was just, I just have no way to explain it. I mean, of the three, to me, that is maybe the weakest. If there was a coin somehow stuck on a piece of produce that I was putting away, I mean, what are the odds of that?
No, yeah, let me tell you, that is like an excellent story, because it's like one of these things, like you said, when you start going through all the probable, and you're like, no, it can't be this and it can't be that, and then what you're left with is your dad.
It was all within a 6-month period after his death. And people would kind of sense him a little bit here and there. Like I had the spirits come over, and but for the most part, he kind of simmered down. But it's one of those things now too, where I'm like, I don't want to see Mom, but she has a high bar. So I'm like, are you going to do what Dad did and let me know, or But I don't want to know. I really don't. And y'all gotta give me space and leave me alone. But it's and as I said, I still have those two the metal pieces, which even fits with ghost lore because they like metal. They can move that pretty easily. But just
that is an excellent story.
It was fun.
There's people that it's not that it's scary or that they're haunting you. It's just like they're kind of remembrances, and then I've heard of that. They kind of fade out. Like, okay, you're okay, I'm okay. It's bye. I
got the message through. I'm here on the other side, and I think part of the reason that he did that was that for many years he had been at the very least an agnostic, and having gone through Vietnam, I mean, I guess I understand that.
Sure.
And when he was a child, I guess. My grandparents weren't going to church enough or something like that. And the minister stopped by to encourage them to come. And my grandfather was like, screw this, and just quit going and quit the family going. So, it was always kind of interesting in that sense. So I kind of wonder if part of the message was, there really is something on the other side.
Yeah. For all the times that I might've said, I'm
not sure.
I'm letting you know. That is a great story.
So and
Brandy, that let me tell you something. That's what I'm saying. That sometimes when stuff like that happens to you personally, that you're not getting it from a third party,
and it gives you so much empathy, to how other people feel, and that's where I think it's good to be a paranormalist as well and have that understanding. Because when people come to you and they're like, "You're going to think I'm crazy," but I'm not sure this happened.
I'm not going to think you're crazy. I'm not.
Yeah. If it makes you feel any better, this is what's happened to me. So it's okay. And they're just letting you know it's okay. So it's been a really wild 25 years, but here we are.
I mean, for my podcast listeners, what website can they find you at?
It is spiritsofstpete.com. So spirits of Saint STPETE.
Okay.
We used to be Spirits of St. Petersburg. We technically still are, but it takes forever to type that. So spiritsofstpete.com. And I am the one who answers emails if people have questions.
Okay.
Our book is up on Amazon. The Paranormal Pets podcasts are on petliferadio.com. They're free.
Okay.
They're all over the place. You can actually get them on Apple, and I don't even know. All I know is I don't listen to them because I sound funny. I do not sound like that.
I know. Isn't it weird that when you listen to yourself, you go like, "That's me"? It's like, that's not me.
That doesn't sound right. But we're here, and if they're interested in tours, pay attention for the St.
I was going to ask you,
Museum.
do you do tours all the time, or is it only certain times of the year?
I do them on request. So for right now, it's on request, but hopefully starting in May, the second Wednesday will be a trolley tour through the History Museum, so a haunted trolley tour. And then on the fourth Friday, I will be doing walking tours from the History Museum. So we're trying to kind of get that more scheduled and regulated. But I will also do them on request. Usually I just have to have a 2-person minimum, and I try to cap them at no more than 10. Because people like to tell you stories, and, I like to have little interactive spots where folks can test the EMF meters and
Okay.
try things out gently. And yes, I do thank everybody for participating. I do ask everybody to stay where they're supposed to be, but yeah, so these are safe spots that we have investigated, but we're not going there consistently enough to really be creating like a tulpa or wearing them out. They seem to be
Right.
pretty open to occasional visits. So I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, absolutely. Feel free to contact me. You can get me through the spirit site as well.
Okay.
We're hopefully going to do like an online paranormal 101 class. I'm trying to build that, at least with the spirits technique.
Okay.
We do have one member who is more of a spiritualist, and she's got a table tipping class in June.
Okay.
So that's interesting. She's done some table tipping with us. That's very much kind of an independent thing. We really do not do table tipping on investigations, but for those who are kind of curious, I don't know how I feel about it, honestly, but it is a different insight into the field, different kind of experience, and coming from a trustworthy source.
Right.
This woman is quite interesting because she works for a whole division of like independent nursing home. Or
Okay.
not nursing home, excuse me, independent funeral homes.
Oh
So
my
she's
God.
part of this caveat. And so her thing is that her job is working with funeral homes, and then her interest is working with the dead. I was like, well, okay.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
there's stuff coming up, and if people want to hear more, just let me know.
Perfect. Thank you, Brandy. I'm gonna talk to you later on. I'm gonna shoot you an email because we had some people that I had a gentleman, one of my guests, that he comes and he winters down here in Florida with some other people, maybe putting together a paranormal conference maybe for the end of the year.
Oh, interesting.
And
Okay.
I'd spoken to him about you, that you had been doing this for so long.
Yeah.
But I will send you a separate email about that, because it was in
Okay.
the planning stages, and we were like, and he says, well, could you find a venue? And and I've got
Okay.
also a group here that out of Ocala with the Bigfoot Paranormal
Oh,
Connection.
yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think I might have seen some of them.
Yeah,
I went
so
to the very first Bigfoot conference down in Plant City. So
right now, as a matter of fact, they're having one in June over here in Ocala. They're having another one.
Interesting. Okay.
So I will send you an email, but thank you so much. It has been wonderful to speak to you.
Oh, this has been fun, and thank you for your patience with the
On
pugs
the
and my mom.
contrary, it's been my pleasure. Take care.
You
Say
too.
hello to your mom.
I will. I'll tell her hello in the morning.
Bye-bye. Wow. She's a great guest. And you know what? I understand where she's coming from with her mom. Been there, done that, kind of. Yeah, and yeah. When you have a parent that's elderly and they, for lack of a better word, you realize, which is the way it's supposed to be, the parents, go first, and then children, and recognize that your parent has lived a long life, and a good life, in the sense of not a perfect life, but a long life. That when they pass, it's like, I don't want to see you. And I know some people say, well, don't you do paranormal investigations? It's like, it's a different scenario when it's your family, and because you never want to think, any of my loved ones getting stuck, and it's like, I know you're okay. You don't need to tell me you're okay. You're okay. Don't worry. Just be on your way and go to where you're supposed to go, whatever you're supposed to do after the fact. And before, because I already spoke to you guys, people had asked me, because a couple of times I had, one of my prior shows, I'd put one of my pictures of when I was on an investigation. Let me see. And I was going to show you guys another one. Let's see if I can find it here. Let's see. Here we go. And this is me in 2008. This is me with Robert the Doll, the very famous Robert the Doll, in the Key West cemetery that they had down there. There's a lot of story that goes on around this doll, but and I've said about, that there was, as a matter of fact, there was a whatchamacallit, right next to that, on this side, you can't see that there, there was a display of the I think it was a Sacred Heart. It was the nun order of the Sacred Heart of Jesus, and apparently they came to Key West back during the like the 1800s, and they built like they did would doing a lot of times. They built the first hospital and stuff like that. But anyway, the display, which you can't see, had there was a display there about these nuns, and in the hospital they had built and blah blah blah. I'm telling you, there was more coming off of that display from the convent and the hospital that they ran for many years, much more than from Robert the Doll. Believe it or not. It's one of those things like sometimes, because, and again, I'm going to go, because some, either a house or in this case, an object gets all this attention because all the paranormal shows do a piece on it. And sometimes there's stuff close by that has got little or no recognition, which most definitely has something going on with it. So the most unexpected places you're going to come across, either whether it's a haunting or a paranormal event or something. So for those people that are always traipsing off to like the place that everybody else has gone, do some research and maybe you might find some places. As a matter of fact, those are the best ones. The ones that don't have a lot of publicity. I'm talking outside of a residential investigation, which, as you can tell by our conversation, can get complicated in the present day. Do some of your research, because you'd be surprised what you will come across, which nobody has really, you're not going to see it, in other words, on any of the paranormal shows that are out there. So anyway, guys, again, thank you so much for spending this time with me. You guys are all wonderful. Don't forget to sign up for my Substack newsletter, yada, yada, all those good things. And again, I've got some great guests coming on, and I will see you guys soon. Till next time.